The moment Victoria Hale whispered those 5 desperate words to a complete stranger, she knew her entire empire hung in the balance. Please, pretend you're my husband, a CEO worth billions, reduced to begging a grease-stained mechanic in a hospital corridor. But desperation makes allies of enemies, and fear knows no class divide. What began as a performance to fool her corporate rivals became something neither could control. A collision of 2 broken worlds that would either destroy them both or forge something powerful enough to heal what they thought was lost forever. This is their story. If you're ready to witness how a lie became the most honest thing either of them had ever done, stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in St. Catherine's Hospital hummed with the kind of mechanical indifference that made everything feel colder. Ethan Cole had been staring at those lights for 3 hours, watching them flicker in patterns that meant nothing, trying to find shapes in their clinical glow the way his daughter Daisy found animals in clouds. His hands were clean for once, scrubbed raw in the men's room until the perpetual grease stains under his nails had faded to gray shadows. He'd worn his only button-down shirt, the blue one with the frayed collar that Sarah had bought him for their last anniversary together. 3 years gone, and he still couldn't bring himself to replace it. The door at the end of the corridor, room 447, remained closed. Behind it, Dr. Morrison was reviewing test results that would determine whether Ethan's 6-year-old daughter would grow up with a father or join her mother in the cruel mathematics of loss. Ethan pressed his palms against his knees, feeling the rough calluses that came from 15 years of turning wrenches and replacing brake pads. Honest work. Simple work. The kind of work that had never prepared him for this, sitting in a hospital corridor while strangers in white coats decided his daughter's fate. Mr. Cole? He looked up sharply, but it was just a nurse passing by. Her smile professionally sympathetic. Not his doctor. Not yet. The waiting was worse than the fear. At least fear had momentum, a direction. This was suspended animation, every second stretching into elastic eternity. He'd been alone since Sarah died. Truly alone in the ways that mattered. Her parents had moved to Florida, too wrapped up in their own grief to be present for Daisy's milestones. His own father had passed years ago, and his mother's dementia had progressed to the point where she no longer recognized her own son, let alone her granddaughter. If these test results came back wrong, if the persistent cough and unexplained fatigue meant what Dr. Morrison's carefully neutral tone had suggested it might mean, Daisy would have no one. 6 years old and orphaned. The thought carved through him like a blade made of ice. The corridor was unusually quiet for a Thursday afternoon. Most of the appointment slots had already cleared out, just Ethan and the hum of fluorescent lights, and the antiseptic smell that seemed to coat the back of his throat. Then the elevator chimed. The doors slid open, and a woman stepped out. Ethan noticed her immediately, not because he was looking, he'd barely registered another human presence in the last 3 hours, but because she carried herself with the kind of presence that altered the atmosphere of a room simply by entering it. She was tall, maybe 5'9", wearing an ivory coat that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that looked effortless but probably required professional assistance. Mid-30s, he guessed, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that scanned the corridor with the precision of someone used to evaluating risk. She walked past him without acknowledgement, heels clicking against linoleum, and stopped 3 doors down from room 447. Her hand reached for the handle, hesitated, then dropped back to her side. Ethan looked away. Everyone in this corridor carried their own weight. He had no capacity for anyone else's. But then he heard it, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a muttered curse that was too quiet to make out the words, but loud enough to convey frustration. Against his better judgment, Ethan glanced over. The woman had turned away from the door, her back pressed against the wall. Her eyes were closed, one hand pressed flat against her chest, as if physically holding something in. She was breathing deliberately, measured inhales and exhales that suggested either meditation or the edge of panic. Then her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her coat pocket, looked at the screen, and whatever she read there made her entire posture change. The controlled breathing stopped. Her jaw tightened, her free hand curled into a fist. "No," she whispered. "Not now. Not here." She typed something rapidly, deleted it, typed again. Her thumb hovered over the send button for a long moment before she lowered the phone and looked directly down the corridor. Her eyes locked on something behind Ethan. He turned slightly and saw a man emerging from the elevator she'd just exited. Mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of silver hair that suggested either premature grain or excellent genes. He was accompanied by a younger woman in business attire, both of them scanning the corridor with purpose. "Shit," the woman in the ivory coat hissed. She moved then, quickly, but not frantically, closing the distance between herself and Ethan in 4 long strides. Before he could process what was happening, she sat down beside him on the plastic bench, close enough that her coat brushed his arm. "Please don't react," she said quietly, her voice low and controlled despite the urgency underneath. "I know this is insane. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I need you to do something, and I need you to do it right now." Ethan stared at her. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the careful makeup that didn't quite hide the shadows beneath them. She smelled like expensive perfume, and something underneath it, the same fear sweat that he recognized from his own skin. "Do what?" he asked. The man in the silver hair had spotted them. He was walking their direction now, the younger woman following half a step behind. The woman beside Ethan turned to face him fully. Her hand found his, fingers interlacing with a familiarity that contradicted the fact that they'd never met. "Please," she said, and he saw something in her eyes that punched through every boundary of self-preservation and social protocol. It was the same thing he saw in the mirror every morning when he thought about Daisy losing both her parents. Raw, undiluted terror. "Please," she repeated, "pretend you're my husband." The question hung in the air between them for exactly 2 seconds. Ethan's first instinct was to pull away, to stand up and put distance between himself and whatever situation this woman was dragging him into. He had enough chaos in his life, enough uncertainty, enough— "Victoria!" The silver-haired man's voice carried down the corridor, professionally warm with an undertone of surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." The woman's hand tightened around Ethan's, not desperately, but firmly, a silent plea. Ethan looked at the approaching man, then back at the woman, Victoria, and something in him made a decision before his conscious mind could catch up. Maybe it was the exhaustion from 3 hours of waiting. Maybe it was the way her fear mirrored his own. Maybe it was just that he understood, on some fundamental level, what it meant to need someone to hold on to when the ground was falling away. He squeezed her hand back. "Honey," he said, the endearment feeling foreign on his tongue, "is this someone from work?" Relief flooded Victoria's face for a microsecond before she locked it down behind a professional smile. She stood, and Ethan rose with her, their hands still linked. "Richard," Victoria said, her voice now carrying the kind of polished authority that suggested boardrooms and power lunches. "What a coincidence." Richard stopped a few feet away, his eyes moving between Victoria and Ethan with the kind of assessment that made Ethan feel like a car on a lot being evaluated for purchase. "Indeed," Richard said. "I had a consultation with a specialist. Nothing serious." His attention shifted fully to Ethan. "I don't believe we've met." Ethan felt Victoria's thumb brush against his palm, once, twice, in what he somehow understood was Morse code for, "Please go along with this." "Ethan Cole," he said, extending his free hand. "Victoria's husband." The words felt like a lie and a lifeline at the same time. Richard's handshake was firm, calculated to communicate strength without aggression. "Richard Bancroft. I serve on the board at Hale Industries." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Strange. I wasn't aware Victoria had married. She's usually quite transparent about her personal life during our board meetings." "We prefer to keep some things private," Victoria said smoothly. "You understand?" The younger woman with Richard had been quiet until now, but she stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "Ms. Hale, while you're here, the merger proposal needs your signature by end of business tomorrow. Richard has some concerns about the timeline." "I'm sure it can wait until I'm back in the office," Victoria said. "Actually," Richard interjected, "given your current circumstances—" His eyes flickered toward the closed door of room 441. The one Victoria had almost entered. "The board has discussed whether you should recuse yourself from the final vote. Medical issues can cloud judgment. We wouldn't want you to make any decisions you might regret." Ethan felt Victoria's hand tighten around his again, but her face remained perfectly composed. My judgment is fine, Richard. Better than fine. Of course, Richard said, his tone suggesting he believed nothing of the sort. But protocol exists for a reason. If you're dealing with health concerns serious enough to require— He gestured vaguely at the oncology wing signage on the wall. Specialized care. Perhaps you should consider a temporary leave of absence. For your own well-being. There it was. The knife slipped between the ribs with surgical precision. Ethan had spent enough time in auto shops to recognize a predator when he saw one. Richard wasn't here by coincidence. He'd somehow known Victoria would be here, and he'd come to exploit it. She's not alone, Ethan heard himself say. Both Victoria and Richard turned to look at him. Whatever she's dealing with, she's not facing it alone. That's what family means. Richard's expression flickered, just for a moment, before settling back into professional neutrality. How reassuring. He pulled a business card from his jacket and handed it to Victoria. Nevertheless, do think about what I said. The board has your best interests at heart. I'm sure, Victoria said, accepting the card with a smile that could have cut glass. Richard nodded to both of them and walked away, the younger woman trailing behind. They disappeared into the elevator, and only when the doors closed did Victoria's shoulders drop half an inch. She released Ethan's hand like it had burned her. I'm sorry, she said, not quite meeting his eyes. That was unconscionable. You were sitting here dealing with your own situation, and I weaponized you for corporate warfare. Ethan flexed his hand, still feeling the ghost of her grip. Your situation looked pretty dire, too. That's not an excuse. I didn't say it was. He sat back down on the bench, the adrenaline starting to fade and leave behind the familiar weight of exhaustion. But you don't need to apologize. I get it. Victoria remained standing, looking down at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You don't know what you just did. Probably not, Ethan admitted, but I know what it looks like when someone's drowning. You needed a hand. I had one available. She studied him for a long moment, and he had the distinct impression of being catalogued, filed, assessed according to criteria he couldn't begin to guess at. You're waiting for test results, she said finally. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. Yeah. Someone you love? My daughter. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. How old? 6. And her mother? Gone. 3 years ago. Victoria sat down beside him again, but this time there was no urgency, no performance. Just two people occupying the same terrible space. I'm sorry, she said, and it sounded genuine. They sat in silence for a while. The fluorescent lights continued their mechanical hum. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. The hospital carried on with its routine operations, indifferent to the private catastrophes unfolding in its corridors. Richard Bancroft, Ethan said eventually, seemed like a real piece of work. Victoria huffed a sound that might have been a laugh. That's diplomatic. I'm guessing he's trying to take something from you? My company. She said it matter-of-factly, the way someone might mention the weather. I built Hale Industries from nothing. 15 years of 80-hour weeks and sacrificing everything that wasn't directly related to the bottom line. Now Richard and 3 other board members want to engineer a merger that would effectively push me out of my own company. Can they do that? If they convince the rest of the board that I'm not fit to lead? Yes. She gestured vaguely at the oncology signage. Being seen here alone, potentially facing a serious diagnosis, that's exactly the kind of ammunition Richard needs to paint me as weak, unreliable, a liability. That's garbage, Ethan said flatly. That's business. Still garbage. This time Victoria definitely smiled, though it was small and fleeting. You're not wrong. So what's the play? Ethan asked. You going to fight him? I don't have much choice. The merger vote happens in 4 days. If I show any weakness between now and then, if Richard can convince even 2 more board members that I'm compromised, I lose everything. And me pretending to be your husband helps how? Victoria looked at him, and he saw her calculating, weighing what to reveal. Because Richard's entire argument hinges on me being isolated, alone, unsupported, a woman so consumed by work that she has no foundation outside the company. If I have a husband, someone stable, present, clearly committed, it undermines his entire narrative. So you need me to what? Show up at board meetings? Smile for photos? No, Victoria said. I need you to be here. For the next 4 days, while I'm getting my own test results and treatment plan, I need Richard to see that I have support, that I'm not falling apart. Ethan let that sink in. You want me to keep pretending to be your husband? Yes. For 4 days? Yes. While we're both potentially dealing with life-threatening diagnoses? Yes. He should have said no. Should have stood up, wished her luck, and gone back to waiting for his own world to potentially collapse. He owed this woman nothing. She was a stranger who'd pulled him into her corporate drama without permission. But then he thought about what she'd said, about being alone, about having no foundation outside her work. He thought about the fear in her eyes when she'd sat down beside him. He thought about the last 3 years of his own life, navigating single fatherhood with no backup, no support system, no one to turn to when Daisy had nightmares, or when the medical bills piled up, or when the loneliness threatened to drown him. He knew exactly what it meant to face the worst moments of your life with no one to hold on to. Okay, he said. Victoria blinked. Okay? I'll do it. 4 days, but we need to establish some ground rules. Of course. First, Daisy, my daughter. She doesn't know about this. I'm not confusing her or lying to her about who you are. Understood. Second, the moment this affects my ability to take care of her, I'm out. No negotiation. Fair. Third, you pay for parking. Hospital rates are criminal. Victoria's lips quirked. Done. And fourth, Ethan met her eyes directly. If your test results are bad, if you're actually sick, this doesn't change. I don't bail because things get hard. You understand? I'm not going to pretend to support you and then vanish when it matters. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Surprise, maybe? Or something more complicated. Why would you promise that to a stranger? Because, Ethan said, nobody should have to face cancer alone. And because if someone had done the same for Sarah, if she'd had more support, more people in her corner, maybe things would have been different. Before Victoria could respond, the door to room 447 opened. Dr. Morrison stepped out, clipboard in hand, scanning the corridor. His eyes landed on Ethan. Mr. Cole, we're ready for you. Ethan stood, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. This was it. The moment everything either continued or fell apart. Victoria stood as well, and before he could think about whether it was appropriate or insane, she took his hand again. Do you want someone with you? She asked quietly. The offer was absurd. They'd known each other for 15 minutes. She had her own medical nightmare to deal with. There was no logical reason to say yes. Yeah, Ethan said. I do. Dr. Morrison's office was smaller than Ethan expected, cramped with filing cabinets and medical journals stacked in precarious towers. The desk was old wood, scarred with coffee rings and pen marks. A framed diploma from Johns Hopkins hung slightly crooked on the wall. The doctor gestured to 2 chairs facing his desk. Ethan sat in the right one, Victoria in the left. Their hands had separated when they entered the room, but she sat close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. Dr. Morrison was in his late 50s, with the kind of face that suggested he'd delivered both good news and bad so many times that he'd learned to keep his expression neutral until the actual words left his mouth. Mr. Cole, he said, settling into his chair and opening the folder on his desk. Thank you for your patience. I know the wait has been difficult. Just tell me, Ethan said. His voice came out rougher than intended. Doctor. Morrison looked at him for a long moment, then down at the papers in front of him. The biopsy results came back this morning, he said. The mass we found in your lung is benign. The word benign hit Ethan like a physical force. The air rushed out of him in a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Benign, he repeated, needing to hear it again to make it real. Yes, Dr. Morrison said, a small smile finally breaking through his professional reserve. It's a hamartoma, a common, non-cancerous growth. We'll want to monitor it with annual scans, but it poses no immediate threat. You don't need surgery, chemotherapy, or radiation. Ethan pressed both hands to his face, feeling tears leak between his fingers. He couldn't stop them, couldn't hold back the overwhelming relief that was simultaneously making him want to laugh and scream and collapse. Daisy would be okay. She wouldn't lose him. She'd grow up with a father. He felt Victoria's hand on his shoulder, a gentle touch, grounding him. "Thank you," he managed to say to Dr. Morrison. "Thank you." "You're very welcome. I'll have the nurse schedule your follow-up appointments before you leave." Dr. Morrison glanced at Victoria, then back to Ethan. "Is there anything else you need to discuss today?" Ethan shook his head, not trusting his voice. They left the office in a daze. The corridor looked different now, the fluorescent lights less harsh, the antiseptic smell less oppressive. Everything had shifted, the world reorganizing itself around the single word, benign. Victoria steered him toward a small alcove with a water cooler and a sad-looking fern. She pulled 2 paper cups from the dispenser and handed him one filled with water. "Drink," she said. He drank, the cold water helping to shock his system back to something resembling normal function. "Sorry," he said after a moment, "for losing it in there." "Don't apologize, you just got your life back." "Yeah." He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the way she was holding herself together through what was clearly her own fear. "What time is your appointment?" Victoria checked her watch. 20 minutes. "Room 441? "Yes." "Do you—" He hesitated, not sure if the offer would be welcome. "Do you want company? Like you gave me?" Victoria's expression did something complicated. "You don't owe me that." "I know, but the offer stands." She was quiet for a moment, weighing something internal. Then she nodded, just once. "Yes, I would like that." They sat in another waiting area, this one specific to the oncology department. The chairs were slightly more comfortable here, the art on the walls attempting to be soothing with abstract watercolors of beaches and forests. There were 3 other people in the waiting room, an elderly couple holding hands, and a woman in her 40s working on a laptop with the kind of fierce concentration that suggested she was trying to outwork her fear. Victoria sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her breathing controlled. She looked like she was preparing for a board presentation rather than potentially hearing the worst news of her life. "How long have you known?" Ethan asked quietly. "That something might be wrong?" 2 months, Victoria said. "I found a lump during a self-exam. Ignored it for 3 weeks because I was in the middle of negotiations for a property development deal in Miami. Finally went to my GP, who sent me to a specialist who ordered a biopsy. 2 months is a long time to carry that alone." "I'm used to alone. Doesn't make it better." Victoria turned to look at him. "You lost your wife to cancer?" "Ovarian. Stage 4 by the time they found it. She lasted 8 months after diagnosis." "I'm sorry." "Me too." Ethan leaned back in his chair, memories flooding in uninvited. "The worst part wasn't the end, you know. It was the middle, when she was still here but fading, and I had to watch her suffer and couldn't do anything to stop it. Couldn't fix it. I'm a mechanic. I fix things. That's what I do. But I couldn't fix her." "You can't fix people the way you fix cars," Victoria said softly. "I know. Doesn't stop you from wanting to try." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Victoria Hale?" Victoria stood, smoothing her coat in a gesture that seemed automatic. Ethan stood as well. "Together?" the nurse asked, looking between them. "Yes," Victoria said. "Together." Dr. Sarah Chen was younger than Dr. Morrison, probably early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a demeanor that managed to be both professional and warm. "Ms. Hale," she said, shaking Victoria's hand before gesturing to the chairs, "please, sit, both of you." Ethan took the same position he'd occupied in Dr. Morrison's office, right chair, close enough to Victoria that she could reach him if she needed to. "Doctor." Chen settled behind her desk and pulled up a file on her computer. "I've reviewed all your test results, including the biopsy from last week. I know waiting has been difficult, so I'll get straight to the information." Victoria's hands gripped the arms of her chair, knuckles whitening slightly. "The biopsy confirmed that the mass is malignant," Dr. Chen said. "You have invasive ductal carcinoma, breast cancer. Based on the imaging and pathology, we're staging it as stage 1A. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ethan watched Victoria's face. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp, didn't show any outward reaction beyond a slight tightening around her eyes. "Stage 1A, Victoria repeated, her voice level. What does that mean for treatment? It means we caught it early, Dr. Chen said. The tumor is small, less than 2 centimeters, and there's no evidence of lymph node involvement. Your prognosis is very good, 5-year survival rates for stage 1. A breast cancer are above 95%. Treatment options? I recommend a lumpectomy to remove the tumor, followed by radiation therapy. Depending on the final pathology, we may also recommend hormone therapy, but we can avoid mastectomy and chemotherapy at this stage. Victoria nodded, processing the information with the same focused intensity Ethan imagined she brought to analyzing quarterly reports. How soon would the surgery need to happen? She asked. Ideally within the next 2 to 3 weeks. I can have my scheduler coordinate with you on specific dates. And recovery time? You'll need someone to drive you home after the procedure and stay with you for at least the first 24 hours. Most patients return to light activities within a week, full activities within 2 to 3 weeks. Victoria glanced at Ethan, just for a second, then back to Dr. Chen. I understand. They discussed details for another 20 minutes. Surgical procedures, radiation protocols, side effects, follow-up schedules. Victoria asked questions with the precision of someone conducting due diligence on a business acquisition. She took notes on her phone. She requested copies of all the reports. But Ethan noticed the small things. The way her hand trembled slightly when she raised it to push a strand of hair behind her ear. The way she swallowed hard after doctor. Chen mentioned the word cancer for the 3rd time. The way her breathing had become just slightly shallower, almost imperceptible unless you were paying attention. When they finally left Dr. Chen's office, Victoria walked straight to the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. I need air, she said. They rode down in silence, stepped out into the hospital lobby, pushed through the main doors into the gray autumn afternoon. Victoria walked until they reached a small courtyard with concrete benches and struggling planters. She sat down heavily, her perfect posture finally collapsing. 95%, she said to no one in particular. Stage 1A, caught early, good prognosis. That's good news, Ethan said carefully, sitting beside her. Yes, it's good news. She laughed, but it came out wrong, sharp and brittle. I should be relieved. I am relieved. But I'm also... The sentence broke off. Her hands were shaking now, both of them. Terrified, Ethan finished. You're terrified. Yes, the word came out as barely more than a whisper. That's normal. You're allowed to be scared. I don't do scared, Victoria said. I do strategic planning, risk assessment, controlled variables. I don't do... Gestured helplessly at herself, at the trembling hands and the tears that were suddenly tracking down her face despite her best efforts to hold them back. This. Ethan didn't say anything. He just sat there, close enough that she knew he was present, but not so close that it felt invasive. Victoria cried for about 3 minutes, silent tears that she kept trying to wipe away as if they were betraying her. When she finally stopped, she pulled a tissue from her coat pocket and cleaned her face with sharp, angry movements. Sorry, she said. Stop apologizing. I'm not... She stopped, breathed. This isn't how I operate. Maybe that's the problem, Ethan said gently. Victoria looked at him sharply. I'm just saying, he continued. Sometimes you need to fall apart a little. Let yourself feel it. Otherwise, it just builds up until it explodes. Is that what happened to you? After your wife died? Yeah. About 6 months after Sarah passed, Daisy asked me why I never cried about Mommy, and I realized I'd been holding it all in, trying to be strong for her, and it was killing me. So I let myself break. Sobbed in the shower for an hour while Daisy watched cartoons. Felt like hell afterward, but also lighter. Like I could breathe again. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I don't know how to do that, the breaking part. You just did. That was 3 minutes. So next time go for 5. Despite everything, Victoria smiled. It was small and fragile, but genuine. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, looked at the screen, and her expression hardened. Richard, she said, he's texting the board members, suggesting an emergency meeting to discuss concerning reports about my health and fitness to lead. Already? He probably had someone watching the oncology check-in desk. He knows I was here for test results. She typed a response, deleted it, typed again. This is what I'm dealing with. The diagnosis is barely an hour old, and he's already weaponizing it. What are you going to tell the board? Victoria lowered her phone, thinking. The truth, that I have a very treatable stage 1 cancer, excellent prognosis, and a strong support system. But I need them to see that support system. I need them to believe it. She looked at Ethan directly. Which means I need you, she said. Starting tonight. Richard is hosting a dinner at his house for the board members, ostensibly to discuss the merger, actually to undermine me. If I show up alone, I look isolated and vulnerable. If I show up with my husband, it looks like you have your life together, Ethan finished. Exactly. What time? 7. It's black tie. Ethan looked down at his button-down shirt and work pants. I don't own a tux. I'll have something sent to your house. What's your address? He gave it to her, still not quite believing this was happening. This morning he'd been worried about Daisy's test results and whether his truck would pass inspection. Now he was agreeing to attend a high society dinner pretending to be the husband of a CEO he'd met 4 hours ago. We need to get our story straight, Victoria said, already shifting into strategic mode. How we met, how long we've been married, basic biographical details. Richard will be looking for inconsistencies. Okay? Can you meet me tomorrow? There's a cafe near my office. We can spend a few hours building a credible backstory. I have to pick up Daisy from school at 3. Morning then. 8? I can do 8. Victoria stood, and Ethan rose with her. The sun was starting to set, painting the courtyard in long shadows. Thank you, Victoria said, for sitting with me in there, for not judging the crying, for agreeing to continue this insanity. You're welcome. Ethan hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I think you're handling this better than you think you are. I'm a wreck. You're a wreck with a plan. That counts for something. Victoria extended her hand, a formal gesture that felt incongruous after everything they'd shared. Ethan took it, and they shook like business associates closing a deal. Until tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, Ethan agreed. He watched her walk away across the courtyard, back straight, shoulders squared, every inch the powerful executive again. Only when she was out of sight did he allow himself to sag against the bench and process everything that had just happened. His phone buzzed. A text from Daisy's school. Pickup reminder, early dismissal tomorrow for parent-teacher conferences. Right? Real life. The life where he was a single father with a daughter who needed him, not a pretend husband to a CEO fighting corporate warfare. But as he walked toward the parking garage, he couldn't shake the memory of Victoria's hand in his, or the look in her eyes when she'd asked him to stay, or the way she'd cried like someone who'd forgotten how. Nobody should have to face cancer alone. He'd meant it when he said it. The question was whether he could actually pull off this deception without losing himself, or worse, without failing her when she needed someone to be real. His truck was where he'd left it, rusted but reliable. He climbed in and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The hospital loomed in his rearview mirror, all concrete and glass and the weight of 1,000 private tragedies. Somewhere inside, people were getting good news and bad news and no news at all. They were waiting and hoping and falling apart and pulling themselves together. And tomorrow, Ethan would start pretending to be someone he wasn't, for a woman he barely knew, in a world he didn't understand. But tonight, he would go home to Daisy, make her favorite dinner, and be grateful that he still had nights to give her. The rest would figure itself out. It had to. The tuxedo arrived at Ethan's apartment at 4:30 in the afternoon, delivered by a man in a black sedan who handed over a garment bag without asking for a signature. Inside, Ethan found not just the tuxedo, but a crisp white shirt, cufflinks, patent leather shoes in exactly his size, and a note written in precise handwriting. Trust me on the bow tie. See you at 6:45. V. He held up the bow tie, already tied in a perfect knot, and wondered what kind of world he'd stumbled into where people sent complete formal wardrobes to strangers on 4 hours' notice. Daddy, who's that for? Daisy stood in the doorway of his bedroom, her backpack still on from school, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd named after her mother. Work thing, Ethan said, which wasn't entirely a lie. I have to go to a dinner tonight. You never go to dinners. I know, sweetheart, but this one's important. Daisy's face fell. Am I going to Mrs. Patterson's? Mrs. Patterson was their elderly neighbor who sometimes babysat in emergencies. She was kind but hard of hearing, and Daisy had to repeat everything 3 times, which frustrated her to tears. Actually, Ethan said, crouching down to her level, I called Grammy Susan. She's coming to stay with you tonight. Daisy's entire face lit up. Grammy's coming? Really? Really? She'll be here in an hour. She's bringing pizza. Grammy Susan wasn't Daisy's actual grandmother. She was Sarah's best friend from college, a woman in her 50s who'd stepped into the grandmother role after Sarah's parents had emotionally checked out. She lived 2 hours away but made the drive at least twice a month, and Daisy adored her. Can we watch a movie? Daisy asked. That's between you and Grammy, but homework first. Daisy groaned but trudged off to the kitchen table where she dumped out her backpack. Ethan watched her go, feeling the familiar guilt that came every time he had to leave her with someone else. 3 years of single parenting hadn't made it easier. If anything, the guilt had compounded, layering itself into something heavy and permanent. But tonight was important. Victoria needed him. And strangely, he found himself wanting to help her. Not out of obligation, but something else he couldn't quite name yet. He tried on the tuxedo at 6 o'clock, after helping Daisy with her math worksheet and listening to her practice reading. The fit was perfect, tailored precisely to his frame in a way that suggested Victoria had somehow acquired his measurements. The shoes were comfortable despite looking like they cost more than his monthly rent. When he looked in the bathroom mirror, he barely recognized himself. He looked like someone who belonged in Victoria's world, someone polished and put together, someone who hadn't spent the morning replacing the transmission on a 2015 Corolla. Wow, Grammy Susan said from the doorway. She'd arrived 10 minutes earlier, bringing not just pizza, but also Daisy's favorite ice cream and a new coloring book. You clean up nice, Ethan Cole. I feel like an imposter, he admitted. Good. That means the costume's working. She studied him with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd known him since he'd married her best friend. Who is she? It's not like that. It's always like that when a man who owns exactly one tie suddenly needs a tuxedo. Ethan sighed. He'd debated how much to tell Susan, but she'd been his lifeline for 3 years. She deserved some version of the truth. I met someone at the hospital yesterday, he said. She's going through some medical stuff, and she needed help with a work situation. It's temporary. Susan's expression softened. Your test results were good? Benign, clean bill of health. Thank heaven. She squeezed his arm. And this woman? Stage 1 breast cancer. Good prognosis. But she's dealing with some complicated corporate politics at the same time. And you're helping her because? Ethan thought about Victoria sitting in that courtyard, crying like someone who'd forgotten how. Because nobody should have to do it alone. Susan smiled, sad and knowing. Sarah would have liked that about you. Still does, probably, wherever she is. The words settled into Ethan's chest, warm and painful at the same time. He kissed Susan on the cheek and went to say goodbye to Daisy, who was already sprawled on the living room floor with her coloring book. Be good for Grammy, he said, kissing the top of her head. I'm always good, Daisy said without looking up from the elaborate rainbow she was creating. I know you are. I love you, kiddo. Love you too, Daddy. He left before the guilt could root him to the floor. Victoria had texted him an address in a neighborhood where Ethan had once delivered auto parts but never actually stopped. The houses here weren't just big, they were statements, sprawling estates set back from the street behind iron gates and manicured lawns. Richard Bancroft's house was a modern glass and steel structure that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. The circular driveway was already crowded with expensive cars, BMWs, Mercedes, a Tesla, and something that might have been a Bentley. Ethan's truck looked like a rusted tumor among them. He was about to pull back onto the street and text Victoria that he couldn't do this when he saw her. She was standing near the front entrance talking to an older couple, wearing a midnight blue dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and armor. Her hair was down tonight, falling in dark waves past her shoulders, and even from a distance he could see she'd transformed herself into someone formidable. Then she saw his truck. Their eyes met across the driveway and something flickered in her expression. Relief, maybe, or surprise that he'd actually shown up. She excused herself from the couple and walked toward him. Ethan got out of the truck, suddenly hyper-aware of how ridiculous he must look climbing out of a vehicle held together with prayer and duct tape while wearing a $3,000 tuxedo. "You came," Victoria said. "I said I would." "People say a lot of things." She looked him over and he saw approval in her eyes. "The tuxedo fits perfectly." "How did you know my measurements?" "I'm very good at estimation. It's part of the job." She hesitated, then added, "You look good, Ethan." "So do you." They stood there for a moment, the evening air cooling around them, both clearly aware that once they walked through those doors together, they were committed to the performance. "Ready?" Victoria asked. "No, but let's do it anyway." Victoria smiled, genuine this time, and held out her hand. Ethan took it, and they walked toward the house together. The interior was exactly what Ethan expected. High ceilings, abstract art that probably cost more than his truck, furniture that looked uncomfortable on purpose. A server in black and white offered them champagne from a silver tray. Victoria took 2 glasses and handed one to Ethan. "Sip it slowly," she murmured. "And remember, we've been married for 2 years. We met at a charity gala where you were working security. I was immediately attracted to how different you were from the men in my usual circles. We kept the relationship quiet at first because I was worried about professional perception, but eventually realized I didn't care what people thought." "Got it," Ethan said, committing the story to memory. "What's my favorite color?" "What?" "Married couples know stupid details about each other. What's my favorite color?" Victoria blinked, clearly not having prepared for that level of detail. "Blue?" "Green. Like Sarah's eyes." He saw Victoria's expression flicker. "But you wouldn't know that. We should have done this better." "We still can." "What's my favorite color?" "I have no idea." "Gray. Specifically, the gray of storm clouds right before rain." "What's my coffee order?" "Black, 2 sugars?" "Americano, no sugar, sometimes with cream if I'm feeling indulgent. What do I do when I'm stressed?" "I don't know." "I reorganize my closet by color and season. It's compulsive and weird, and my assistant thinks I'm losing it every time she finds my shoes sorted by heel height. But it helps me think. What's your tell when you're lying?" Ethan thought about it. "I rub the back of my neck." "Don't do that tonight. What's mine?" "You just told me you reorganize closets." "No, when I'm lying to people. Watch." She turned to face a couple entering the room, smiled warmly, and said, "Thomas." "Jennifer, so good to see you." Her left hand, the one not holding champagne, touched the diamond pendant at her throat. Just once, barely noticeable. Then she turned back to Ethan. I touch my necklace." "Noted." "Victoria." Richard Bancroft appeared as if summoned, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost double what Ethan's did. His smile was sharp. "I'm so glad you could make it. And you brought your husband." The way he said husband made it clear he didn't believe it for a second. "Richard," Victoria said smoothly, "you remember Ethan." "Of course." Richard extended his hand and Ethan shook it, matching his grip strength exactly. "I was surprised to hear about your marriage, Victoria. You've always been so private about your personal life." "Some things are worth protecting," Victoria said. "Indeed." Richard's eyes moved between them, searching for cracks. "Tell me, Ethan, what is it you do? Victoria mentioned you work in automotive?" "I'm a mechanic," Ethan said, deciding honesty was easier than invention. "I own a small shop on the east side." "How practical?" Richard's tone suggested he'd said something else entirely. "And how does that work, being married to one of the most powerful women in the city? The schedule differences alone must be challenging." "We make it work," Ethan said. "Turns out love doesn't really care about schedule differences." Victoria's hand found his, fingers interlacing in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "How lovely," Richard said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "You'll have to tell us the story of how you met. I'm sure it's fascinating." "Actually," said a woman's voice behind them, "I'd love to hear that too." They turned to find an elegant woman in her 60s, silver hair pulled back in a chignon, sharp intelligence in her eyes. Ethan recognized her from the photo Victoria had shown him earlier. Margaret Chen, the senior board member whose vote could swing the entire merger decision. "Margaret," Victoria said, and Ethan heard genuine warmth there. "I didn't know you were coming tonight. Richard called this afternoon. Said it was urgent board business. Margaret's gaze settled on Ethan with open curiosity. And you must be the mysterious husband we've just learned about. Ethan Cole, he said, shaking her hand. Not that mysterious, really. I'll be the judge of that, Margaret said, but she was smiling. Victoria has mentioned a husband exactly 0 times in the 12 years I've known her, so either you're very new or she's very good at keeping secrets. Both, Victoria said. We've been married 2 years, but I kept it private because I was worried about professional perception. And what changed? Margaret asked. Victoria looked at Ethan and something passed between them, a moment of unspoken communication. I got sick, she said simply, and I realized that pretending I didn't need anyone was just another form of weakness. The honesty in her voice surprised Ethan. This wasn't part of the script they'd barely had time to prepare. This was real. Margaret's expression softened. Richard mentioned something about a health concern. Stage 1 breast cancer, Victoria said, and Ethan felt her hand tighten around his. Caught early. Excellent prognosis. Surgery scheduled for next week. My dear, Margaret said, reaching out to touch Victoria's arm. I'm so sorry, but you're right. Catching it early makes all the difference. My sister went through the same thing 5 years ago. She's cancer-free now, running marathons. That's encouraging to hear. And you have support? Margaret's eyes moved to Ethan. Yes, Victoria said. I have Ethan. Good. Margaret squeezed her arm once more, then stepped back. Because that's what matters in the end, not quarterly reports or merger deals. The people who show up when everything else falls apart. She excused herself to greet another guest, leaving Ethan and Victoria standing together in a room full of people who were watching them with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. That went better than expected, Ethan murmured. Margaret's a good person. It's the others I'm worried about. Victoria's eyes tracked across the room to where Richard was talking to 2 other board members, his gestures animated. He's already working them, probably saying I'm too compromised to lead, that I've been hiding a secret marriage because I knew it would look unstable. Is that actually unstable? Being married? In Richard's narrative, everything I do is unstable. Too aggressive in negotiations. Unstable. Too cautious with investments. Unstable. Married. Unstable. Not married. Unstable. The goal isn't consistency, it's control. Dinner was announced, and they were directed to a dining room that seated 20. Ethan found himself placed between Victoria and a board member named Harrison, whose handshake felt like a political statement. Across the table, Richard presided over the gathering like a king holding court. The first course arrived, something involving scallops and microgreens that Ethan didn't recognize, but Victoria navigated without hesitation. He watched how she held her fork, which glass she drank from when she placed her napkin, and copied everything exactly. So Ethan, Harrison said, his voice carrying across several conversations, Victoria tells us you're a mechanic. That must be quite different from her world. Very different, Ethan agreed, but that's part of what works. She deals with corporate strategy. I deal with broken transmissions. Different problems, same basic principle. Figure out what's not working and fix it. And do you apply that philosophy to marriage, Yutz? Harrison asked. When something's broken, you just fix it? It was a trap. Ethan could hear it in the carefully casual tone. No, he said. Because marriage isn't a machine. It's 2 people choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. You can't fix that. You can only show up for it. Victoria's hand found his under the table, squeezing once. How poetic, Richard said from across the table. Tell me, Ethan, what do you think about the Meridian merger? I'm sure Victoria discusses these things with you. Another trap. If he knew about it, it suggested Victoria was unprofessional, sharing confidential business information. If he didn't, it suggested their marriage was superficial. She mentioned it, Ethan said carefully, but I don't pretend to understand the details. That's her expertise, not mine. But surely you have an opinion, as her husband, her partner. My opinion, Ethan said, meeting Richard's eyes directly, is that Victoria is the smartest person I've ever met, and whatever decision she makes will be the right one. Blind faith, Richard said. How romantic. Not blind, Ethan corrected. Earned. There's a difference. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard's smile remained fixed, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. Victoria's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and her expression changed, just fractionally, but Ethan had spent enough time watching her to notice. "Excuse me," she said, standing. "I need to take this." She left the dining room, and Ethan felt exposed without her presence beside him. The conversation continued around him, board members discussing property values and development deals in language that sounded like English but might as well have been code. "Don't worry," Margaret said from further down the table, clearly noticing his discomfort. "They forget that normal people don't speak in corporate jargon. Give it 5 more minutes and they'll move on to complaining about their golf handicaps." Ethan smiled gratefully. "How long have you known Victoria?" "Since she was 23 and pitching her first development project to a room full of men who thought she was someone's assistant. She had a 10-page proposal and more confidence than anyone had a right to possess at that age." Margaret's expression turned fond. "She reminded me of myself, except smarter and more ruthless. I've been mentoring her ever since. She's lucky to have you." "I think it's mutual." Margaret studied him with those sharp eyes. "You're not what I expected." "I'm getting that a lot tonight. I mean that as a compliment. Victoria's dated very polished men. Executives, lawyers, the occasional politician. All of them were essentially variations of her. Same world, same language, same drive. They bored her to tears within 6 months. And you think I'm different? I think you're the first person I've seen her actually relax around. Even under all this pressure, she's more herself with you than I've seen her be in years." Margaret paused. "That's either very good acting or very real." Before Ethan could figure out how to respond, Victoria returned to the dining room. But something had changed. Her face was carefully neutral, but Ethan saw tension in the set of her shoulders. She leaned down and whispered in his ear, "We need to leave now." "What happened?" "Not here. Please." Ethan stood immediately, placing his napkin on the table. "I'm sorry," he said to the room at large. "We need to go. Family emergency." Richard's eyebrows rose. "How unfortunate. I hope everything is all right." "It will be," Victoria said, her voice steady despite whatever was happening. "Margaret, we'll talk tomorrow. Richard, thank you for dinner." They left quickly, Victoria's hand tight around Ethan's as they navigated back through the house and out to the driveway. The valet tried to bring around her car, but she waved him off. "Your truck," she said to Ethan. "Get us out of here." He didn't argue. They climbed into his rusted vehicle, Victoria looking absurdly elegant in her midnight blue dress amid the fast food wrappers and tools, and he drove. Not toward her place or his, just away. "Where are we going?" he asked after 10 minutes of silence. "I don't care. Anywhere that isn't there." Her hands were shaking in her lap. "Pull over, anywhere. Just pull over." Ethan took the next exit and found a park, closed for the night but with a parking lot that overlooked a lake. He killed the engine and waited. Victoria sat perfectly still, staring out at the dark water. Then she pulled her phone from her purse and handed it to him. On the screen was an email from someone named Jennifer Walsh, timestamped 20 minutes ago. The subject line read, "Inquiry about Mrs. Cole." Ethan's stomach dropped as he read. "Dear Mrs. Hale, per your assistant's request for background verification on Ethan Cole, please find attached public records indicating Mr. Cole has been widowed for 3 years and has sole custody of his daughter, Daisy Marie Cole, age 6. There are no marriage records filed in the past 5 years under his name in this county or surrounding jurisdictions. Please let me know if you require additional information. Best, Jennifer Walsh, private investigator." The silence in the truck was absolute. "One of the board members," Victoria said, her voice hollow, "hired an investigator. The email got forwarded to my assistant by mistake. Whoever sent it used an old address. She called me immediately." Ethan handed the phone back, feeling numb. "So they know. They know we're not married. They probably know the whole thing is a performance." Victoria laughed, bitter and sharp. "Richard is going to crucify me with this. Not just the merger, my entire career. I'll be the CEO who faked a marriage to manipulate the board." "It's over." She pressed her hands to her face, and Ethan saw her shoulders start to shake. "I'm sorry," she said through her hands. "I'm so sorry I dragged you into this. You should go. Get away from me before this destroys you too." Ethan sat there processing. The smart thing would be to do exactly what she said, walk away, protect himself and Daisy from whatever fallout was coming. This wasn't his fight. This wasn't his world. But then he thought about Victoria sitting beside him in that hospital corridor, terrified and alone, asking a stranger for help because she had no one else. He thought about her crying in the courtyard, about the way she'd held his hand during both their doctor appointments, about Margaret saying she'd never seen Victoria this relaxed. He thought about Sarah, dying alone in a hospital bed while he was at home with Daisy, forever guilty that he hadn't been there at the end. "No," he said. Victoria lowered her hands. "What?" "No, I'm not walking away." "Ethan, you don't understand what this means. They'll investigate you too. They'll drag your name through." "I don't care." He turned to face her fully. "You asked me to pretend to be your husband for 4 days. I agreed. The deal hasn't changed." "The deal has completely changed. They know we're lying." "So we stop lying." Ethan heard the words come out of his mouth before he'd fully thought them through. "We make it real." Victoria stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "Make what real?" "The marriage. We actually get married, right now, tonight. Then it's not a lie anymore." "That's insane." "Probably, but it solves the problem." Ethan was thinking out loud now, the plan forming as he spoke. "They did a background check. They found out we're not married. But if we go to the courthouse first thing Monday morning and file the paperwork, then by the time they confront you, it's true. We are married. Maybe we rushed it because of your diagnosis. Maybe we wanted to make it legal before your surgery. Whatever story we tell, it's backed up by actual documentation." "Ethan, marriage isn't a mechanic's fix. You can't just—" "Why not?" He cut her off. "You need this merger to go through. You need the board to see you as stable and supported. I'm offering you actual stability and actual support for however long you need it." "And what do you get out of it?" Victoria demanded. "Why would you do this?" Ethan thought about his answer carefully. "Because in the last 24 hours, you're the first person who's made me feel like I matter outside of being Daisy's father. Because you sat with me when I was terrified about my test results. Because I think you deserve someone in your corner who isn't trying to take something from you. And because—" He paused, surprised by his own honesty. "I'm tired of being alone too." Victoria's eyes were wide, searching his face for the trap, the angle, the ulterior motive. "This is crazy." "Yes. We barely know each other." "True. My life is a nightmare of corporate politics and cancer treatment." "I know. You have a 6-year-old daughter who would have to deal with all of this." "Also true." Ethan took a breath. "But she'd also get to see her father not completely alone for the first time in 3 years. And maybe that's worth something." Victoria turned away, looking out at the dark water. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither could fully process. "Monday morning," she finally said, not looking at him. "City Hall opens at 8. We'd need witnesses." "I can find witnesses." "And Daisy?" "I tell her the truth, that I met someone who needs help and we're helping each other. She's 6, not stupid. She'll understand." "Will she?" Victoria turned back to him. "Will she understand why her father married a stranger?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But I'd rather explain this to her than explain why I walked away when someone needed me." Victoria studied him for a long moment. Then she pulled her phone back out and made a call. "Jennifer," she said when someone answered. "It's Victoria Hale. I need you to do something for me, and I need it done before Monday morning." She laid out instructions, background checks, legal documentation, marriage license requirements. When she ended the call, she looked at Ethan with something between disbelief and determination. "Okay," she said, "let's do this insane thing. But I have conditions." "Name them." "First, prenup. You get nothing from my company, I get nothing from your shop. This is protection for both of us." "Agreed." "Second, Daisy's well-being comes first, always. If this starts affecting her negatively, we end it." "Obviously." "Third, we live separately. I'm not asking you to uproot your entire life. We maintain our own spaces, our own routines. This is a legal arrangement, not a cohabitation." "Makes sense." "And fourth," Victoria hesitated, "when this is over, when the merger vote happens and I'm through treatment, we end it cleanly. Annulment or divorce, whatever makes the most sense legally. No drama, no messiness. We both walk away." Something in Ethan's chest tightened at that final condition, but he nodded. "Okay." Okay. Victoria exhaled shakily. I can't believe we're doing this. Neither can I. They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the enormity of what they'd just agreed to. Then Victoria started laughing, real laughter, the kind that came from the edge of hysteria and disbelief. What? Ethan asked. I just agreed to marry a man I met yesterday in a hospital corridor. My therapist is going to have a field day with this. You have a therapist? Everyone in my tax bracket has a therapist. It's required by law. She was still laughing, and Ethan found himself smiling despite everything. For what it's worth, he said, I think you're handling your nervous breakdown with remarkable grace. Is that what this is? A nervous breakdown disguised as a marriage proposal? I didn't actually propose. We just sort of mutually agreed to commit fraud in reverse. Victoria's laughter subsided into something softer. That's actually a perfect description of this entire situation. Ethan started the truck, the engine coughing to life. I should get you home. It's late. Wait. Victoria touched his arm. I need to say something first. He waited. Thank you, she said quietly, for not running, for not thinking I'm completely unhinged, for, she gestured helplessly, all of it. You're welcome. I mean it, Ethan. What you're offering to do, it's beyond anything I had a right to ask for. You didn't ask. I offered. There's a difference. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan wondered what she saw. A mechanic in a borrowed tuxedo offering to marry a stranger to save her company. It sounded ridiculous even in his own head. But as he drove her home to her penthouse apartment in the financial district, neither of them talking but somehow communicating anyway, Ethan realized something. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't just surviving. He wasn't just going through the motions of being a father and a business owner and a functional human. He was choosing something, actively, consciously choosing to step into someone else's chaos and say, I'll stand with you. Maybe it was insane. Maybe it would blow up in both their faces. But maybe, just maybe, it would be exactly what they both needed. Ethan pulled up outside Victoria's building at midnight, the glass tower reflecting city lights like a vertical river. A doorman in uniform immediately approached the truck, his expression flickering between professional courtesy and confusion at the vehicle's condition. Ms. Hale, the doorman said, opening her door. Good evening. Good evening, Marcus. Victoria stepped out, then turned back to Ethan. Monday morning, 8 o'clock, City Hall, 3rd floor. I'll be there. With witnesses. With witnesses, he confirmed. She nodded once, then walked into the building without looking back. Ethan watched until she disappeared into the elevator before driving home, his mind racing through everything that had just happened and everything that was about to. When he got back to his apartment, Grammy Susan was asleep on the couch, reading glasses still perched on her nose, a mystery novel open across her chest. Ethan checked on Daisy, sound asleep, clutching Sarah the rabbit, before gently waking Susan. Hey, he whispered. Sorry I'm so late. Susan blinked awake, immediately alert. Everything okay? Not even a little bit. Ethan sat down in the armchair across from her. I need to tell you something, and I need you to not judge me until I'm finished. Susan sat up, removing her glasses. That's a concerning way to start a conversation. Yeah, well. Ethan took a breath and told her everything. The hospital meeting, Victoria's situation, Richard's investigation, and the decision to actually get married on Monday morning. When he finished, Susan was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You're right, that is insane. I know. But I understand it. Ethan looked up, surprised. You do? After Sarah died, I watched you disappear into yourself. You became a father and a mechanic and nothing else. No friends, no hobbies, no life outside those two roles. You were surviving, not living. Susan leaned forward. This woman, Victoria, she sounds like she's been doing the same thing, just with boardrooms instead of brake pads. So you think I should do this? I think you're going to do it regardless of what I think. But yes, I support it, with conditions. Everyone has conditions, Ethan muttered. My condition is that you tell Daisy the truth, not some watered-down version. The actual truth, in language she can understand. I plan to. And if you need help, with childcare, with explaining things to her teacher, with any of it, you call me. Day or night? Thank you, Susan. She stood and pulled him into a hug that smelled like the lavender soap she'd used for as long as he'd known her. Sarah would have liked Victoria, I think. She always said you needed someone who challenged you. This is beyond challenging. This is potentially insane. Sometimes the best things are. Susan gathered her purse and keys. I'll come by Sunday afternoon. We can talk to Daisy together if you want. After she left, Ethan stood in his small living room surrounded by the physical evidence of his life with Daisy. Finger paintings on the fridge, toys scattered near the bookshelf, Sarah's photo still in its place on the mantel. In 48 hours, he would be married to someone who existed in a completely different universe from this one. He poured himself a whiskey he rarely drank and sat at the kitchen table trying to process. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. Jennifer confirmed we can file Monday at 8. Prenup will be ready by Sunday evening for review. This is really happening. Ethan typed back. Cold feet already? Frozen solid. You? Same, but I'm still showing up. Good. So am I. Get some sleep, Ethan. He wanted to ask if she was okay, if she was scared, if she had anyone to talk to about this besides her lawyer and her therapist. But it was midnight, and they were strangers planning to get married in less than 60 hours, and some questions felt too intimate for text. Instead, he wrote, "You too. See you Monday." Saturday morning arrived too quickly. Daisy woke him at 6:30 by jumping on his bed, a habit Sarah had encouraged, and he'd never had the heart to break. "Daddy, Grammy said we're having pancakes for breakfast." "Grammy's not here, sweetheart." "Then we should make them ourselves." Daisy bounced again for emphasis. They made pancakes, or rather Ethan made pancakes while Daisy helped by adding chocolate chips in quantities that were medically inadvisable. While they ate, Daisy chattered about her week at school, about the book her teacher was reading them, about how Tommy Richardson had gotten in trouble for putting glue in Amy Chen's hair. Normal life. Simple life. The life Ethan was about to complicate beyond measure. "Daddy," Daisy said, syrup on her chin, "are you sad?" "No, baby. Why?" "You have your thinking face. You only have that face when you're sad or worried." 6 years old, and she could read him like a manual. "I'm not sad, just thinking about some grown-up stuff." What kind of grown-up stuff? This was the opening, and Ethan knew he should take it, but the words caught in his throat. How did you explain to a 6-year-old that her father was marrying a stranger for reasons that sounded insane even to adults? "I'll tell you tomorrow, okay? When Grammy's here. It's big news, and I want to make sure I explain it right." Daisy studied him with Sarah's eyes, sharp and intuitive. "Is it good news or bad news?" "I think it's good news, but it's also complicated news." "Okay." She returned to her pancakes, apparently satisfied. "Can we go to the park today?" They spent the day doing normal Saturday things. Park, lunch at the diner Daisy loved, grocery shopping where she convinced him they needed ice cream in 3 different flavors. Ethan's phone buzzed periodically with texts from Victoria, mostly logistics. The prenup was drafted, the witnesses were arranged, she'd secured an appointment slot at City Hall. Each message made it more real and more surreal simultaneously. That evening, after Daisy was in bed, Ethan sat down with the prenuptial agreement Victoria's lawyer had emailed. It was 23 pages of legal language that essentially said they would share nothing except a marriage certificate. His business stayed his, her empire stayed hers. In the event of dissolution, neither party would seek support or division of assets acquired before or during the marriage. It was the most unromantic document Ethan had ever read, and he signed it anyway. Sunday afternoon, Susan arrived with cookies and her usual no-nonsense energy. Daisy was thrilled to see her again so soon, but her excitement dimmed when she saw both adults' serious faces. "Are we having a family meeting?" she asked, her voice small. "Sort of," Ethan said, sitting down on the couch and patting the space beside him. "Come sit with me, kiddo. I need to tell you about something important." Daisy climbed up, and Susan sat in the armchair, providing silent support. "Remember the hospital lady I told you about?" Ethan started. "The one who needed help? The pretty one?" "Yeah, her name is Victoria, and she's going through something really hard right now. She's sick, and she has to have surgery soon, and some people at her work are trying to take advantage of that." Daisy's face scrunched in confusion. "That's mean." "It is mean, and I've been helping her, so those mean people see that she has support, that she's not alone. That's good. Mommy always said we should help people. The mention of Sarah hit Ethan in the chest, but he pushed through. She did say that. And you're right, it is good to help. But now Victoria needs a different kind of help. She needs someone to be her family, officially. On paper. Susan stepped in, her voice gentle. What your daddy is trying to say is that he and Victoria are getting married tomorrow, to help each other. Daisy's eyes went wide. Married? Like Mommy and Daddy were married? Sort of like that, Ethan said carefully. But different. Your mom and I got married because we loved each other and wanted to spend our lives together. Victoria and I are getting married to help each other through a hard time. We're friends who are going to be married friends. I don't understand. I know it's confusing, baby. Grown-ups don't always understand it either. Ethan took her small hands in his. But here's what I need you to know. This doesn't change anything between you and me. I'm still your dad. This is still your home. Victoria isn't trying to replace your mom. Nobody could ever do that. Is she going to live here? No, she has her own home. We're going to keep living our regular life. Then why are you getting married? It was the same question Ethan kept asking himself. Because sometimes adults need to help each other in ways that are hard to explain. And because Victoria is alone, and I've been alone since Mom died, and maybe we can be alone together, does that make sense? Daisy thought about it, her face serious. Will I meet her? If you want to, but only when you're ready. Is she nice? Ethan thought about Victoria crying in that courtyard, about her fierce protection of her company, about the way she'd held his hand through his doctor's appointment. Yeah, she's nice, and she's strong, and she's scared, just like we get scared sometimes. Okay, Daisy said finally. If you think it's good, Daddy, then it's probably good. You always make good choices. The trust in her voice nearly broke him. I hope so, sweetheart. I really hope so. That night, after Daisy was asleep and Susan had left with promises to check in daily, Ethan stood at his bedroom window looking out at the city lights. His phone rang, Victoria's name on the screen. Hey, he answered. Hey. Her voice sounded tired. I'm having second thoughts. Me too. But I'm still going to show up tomorrow. Same. A pause. Then Victoria said, I told my therapist about this plan. She said it was either the worst decision I've ever made or the most honest one. Which does she think it is? She won't tell me. Says I have to figure it out myself. Victoria sighed. I talked to Margaret too. Gave her a heads up about the marriage. She laughed for 5 minutes straight, then said she'd be there as a witness if I needed one. That's good, right? I think so. She's known me long enough to call me on my bullshit, and she's not calling me on this. That means something. Another pause. How did Daisy take it? Better than I deserved. She doesn't fully understand, but she's willing to trust me. That's more than I would do at her age. Hell, that's more than I would do now. Ethan smiled despite the nerves churning in his stomach. You're trusting me tomorrow. Marrying a stranger is basically the definition of trust. Or insanity. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Victoria laughed, soft and real. No, they're not. Then more seriously, Ethan, if you want to back out, I'll understand. This is asking too much of you. I know what I'm signing up for. Do you? Because I'm not sure I do, and it's my life we're trying to save. Then we'll figure it out together. That's what married people do, right? I have no idea. I've never done this before. Neither have I. Well, not like this. Ethan sat down on his bed. We'll make it up as we go. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one? No, Victoria admitted. God help me, I don't. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. The weather, Daisy's obsession with chocolate chip pancakes, Victoria's assistant's habit of organizing her calendar in color-coded blocks. Normal conversation between two people who were about to do something completely abnormal. When they finally hung up, Ethan lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow morning, he would wake up single. Tomorrow afternoon, he would be married. The reality of it felt like a weight on his chest and wings on his back simultaneously. His last thought before sleep was of Victoria's voice saying, "We'll figure it out together," and the surprising comfort those words provided. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of October weather that promised rain without delivering it. Ethan dressed carefully in the only suit he owned, the one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral and hadn't touched since. It still fit, barely, though the shoulders were tighter than he remembered. Grammy Susan arrived at 7 to stay with Daisy, who was still asleep. "You look terrified," Susan observed. "That's because I am." "Good. That means you're taking this seriously." She straightened his tie. "Go. Don't keep your bride waiting." Ethan drove downtown through early morning traffic, his hands tight on the steering wheel. He'd arranged for 2 witnesses, Jimmy, who worked at the shop and owed Ethan enough favors to show up with no questions asked, and Father Mike from the community center where Ethan sometimes volunteered. Neither understood what was happening, but both had agreed to be there. City Hall was already busy when Ethan arrived, people streaming in and out with the efficient chaos of government in motion. He found Jimmy and Father Mike waiting by the third-floor elevators, both looking confused but willing. "This is definitely the weirdest favor you've ever asked for," Jimmy said, shaking Ethan's hand. "But congratulations, I guess?" "Thanks, I think." Father Mike, an elderly priest who'd known Ethan since childhood, studied him with concern. "Son, are you sure about this? Marriage is a sacred commitment, not something to rush into." "I know, Father, and I appreciate the concern, but I'm sure." "Does this have anything to do with the woman you mentioned at the hospital?" "Everything to do with her." Before Father Mike could press further, the elevator doors opened and Victoria stepped out. She wore a simple ivory dress that fell to her knees, elegant but understated. Her hair was pulled back, minimal makeup, a small clutch purse in her hands. She looked beautiful and terrified in equal measure. Behind her came Margaret Chen, dressed in a navy suit and carrying a small bouquet of white roses. "I thought you might want flowers," Margaret said, handing them to Victoria. "Every bride should have flowers." Victoria's eyes went suspiciously bright. "Thank you, Margaret." "Don't thank me yet. I'm still deciding if this is brilliance or madness." "Can it be both?" Margaret smiled. "With you, it usually is." "Yet." Introductions were made, Victoria meeting Jimmy and Father Mike, Ethan meeting Margaret more formally. Then they all stood in awkward silence, waiting for their appointment time. "This is surreal," Victoria murmured to Ethan. "Completely." "Last chance to run. You first." "I asked first." "Okay, then we run together. On 3, 1, 2. Victoria Hale and Ethan Cole." A clerk appeared with a clipboard. "We're ready for you." Victoria looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back. Neither of them ran. The ceremony room was small and bureaucratic, with fluorescent lights and a window overlooking a parking garage. The officiant was a woman in her 50s who'd probably performed this ritual hundreds of times, her demeanor professionally pleasant but detached. "Do you have the license and witnesses?" she asked. Victoria produced the paperwork. Margaret and Jimmy stepped forward as witnesses, signing where indicated. "All right then." The officiant opened a small book. "We'll keep this simple. Victoria Hale, do you take Ethan Cole to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Victoria's voice came out steady despite her shaking hands. "I do." "Ethan Cole, do you take Victoria Hale to be your lawfully wedded wife?" This was it, the point of no return. Ethan thought about Daisy sleeping peacefully that morning, trusting him. He thought about Sarah, who'd made him promise not to spend his life alone. He thought about Victoria crying in a hospital courtyard and Margaret saying some things were worth protecting. "I do," he said. "Rings?" They looked at each other. In all the planning and legal documentation, neither had thought about rings. "We don't have," Victoria started. Margaret stepped forward and slipped a simple gold band off her own finger. "Use this. It was my mother's. You can return it later or keep it, whichever feels right." Victoria's hands trembled as she took the ring. Ethan held out his left hand and she slid it onto his ring finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for him. "By the power vested in me by the state," the officiant said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss if you'd like, though it's not required." They stood facing each other, this mechanic and this CEO, strangers who just legally bound themselves together. The kiss wasn't required, but somehow it felt necessary. A seal on the agreement, proof that this was real. Ethan leaned in slowly, giving Victoria every chance to pull back. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was brief and careful, and somehow more intimate than anything Ethan had experienced in 3 years. When they pulled apart, Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Well," Margaret said into the silence. That happened. The paperwork was signed, copies distributed, congratulations offered by people who clearly thought this was a normal Monday morning wedding. Within 20 minutes, they were back in the elevator, descending to street level as legally married spouses. "I need coffee," Victoria said to no one in particular. "I need coffee or possibly a stiff drink, and it's only 9 in the morning." "There's a diner 2 blocks away," Ethan offered. "Nothing fancy, but the coffee's good." They ended up at Murphy's Diner, Ethan, Victoria, Margaret, Jimmy, and Father Mike crowding into a corner booth meant for 4. A waitress brought coffee without being asked, sensing the need in their collective silence. "So," Jimmy said finally, "anyone want to explain what the hell that was about?" Ethan and Victoria looked at each other. Some unspoken communication passed between them, and Victoria nodded. "It's complicated," Ethan started. "It's corporate warfare," Victoria corrected, "and medical crisis, and 2 desperate people making what might be a terrible decision." She laid out the situation, sanitized for the audience but honest about the essentials: Richard's investigation, the merger vote, her diagnosis, the need for documented stability. When she finished, Jimmy whistled low. "That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or the craziest. Haven't decided which." "Neither have we," Ethan admitted. Father Mike had been quiet, but now he leaned forward. "Son, I've known you since you were 8 years old. I married you and Sarah. I buried her 3 years ago. And I'm telling you this as someone who cares about your soul. This kind of deception, even for good reasons, it can poison things." "It's not deception anymore," Victoria said quietly. "As of 20 minutes ago, it's legally true. We are married." "But it's not real," Father Mike pressed. "Not in the ways that matter." "Isn't it?" Margaret interjected. "They're committing to support each other through difficult circumstances. They're legally and financially binding themselves. They're making vows in front of witnesses. What part of that isn't real?" "The love," Father Mike said simply. "Marriage without love is just a contract." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but sometimes a contract is what you need. Sometimes committing to show up, to be present, to not abandon someone. Maybe that's a kind of love too. Not romantic love, but something real." The table fell silent. Victoria was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. The waitress returned with plates of food none of them had ordered, but all of them needed. They ate in relative quiet, processing. Margaret eventually excused herself, hugging Victoria tightly before leaving. "I have to get to the board meeting," Margaret said, "where I will not mention your wedding because that's your news to share. But Victoria, that merger vote is in 3 days. Whatever you're planning, you need to be ready." "I will be," Victoria promised. After Margaret left, Jimmy and Father Mike followed, leaving Ethan and Victoria alone in the booth with half-eaten breakfast and cold coffee. "My assistant is probably losing her mind," Victoria said, checking her phone. 17 missed calls. "You should go. Handle whatever corporate crisis is brewing." "Yeah." But she didn't move. "Ethan, about what you said, about commitment being a kind of love, I meant it. I'm not going to bail on you." "I know. That's what scares me." Victoria met his eyes. "What if this stops being pretend? What if it becomes something we can't walk away from cleanly? Then we deal with that when it happens. But right now, you need to get through this merger vote and your surgery. Everything else is future problem." Victoria smiled, sad and real. "You're surprisingly wise for a mechanic. And you're surprisingly human for a CEO." She laughed, the sound breaking the tension. Then she pulled something from her purse, a simple gold band, feminine counterpart to the one on Ethan's finger. "Margaret gave me this too," Victoria said. "Said married people should look married." She slid it onto her own ring finger, and Ethan watched the gold catch the diner's fluorescent light. "There. Now it's official." "Now it's official," he echoed. They left the diner together, stepping out into the gray October morning. The rain that had threatened earlier finally began to fall, light and cold. "I'll see you tomorrow," Victoria asked. "At the office?" "Richard's calling an emergency board session. He's going to try to force the merger vote early before I can stabilize my position." "What time?" 2 o'clock. Wear something that says supportive husband. I only have two settings, mechanic and funeral suit. Funeral suit works. Just smile more than you would at an actual funeral. Ethan smiled despite everything. I can do that. Victoria started to walk away, then turned back. Thank you. For showing up. For following through. For not thinking I'm completely insane. Oh, I definitely think you're insane. I just happen to be equally insane, so it balances out. She laughed again, and the sound followed Ethan all the way back to his truck. When he got home, Grammy Susan was making lunch while Daisy did homework at the kitchen table. Well? Susan asked. Well, Ethan said, holding up his left hand to show the ring. I'm married. Daisy looked up from her math worksheet, eyes wide. Really? You really did it? Really did it. She studied him carefully. Are you happy? The question caught him off guard. Was he happy? He was terrified and confused and stepping into a situation that could explode spectacularly. But underneath all that, there was something else, a sense of purpose, of mattering to someone beyond the limited scope of his daily life. Yeah, he said, surprised to find it true. I think I am. Daisy nodded, satisfied, and returned to her homework. Grammy Susan, however, pulled him aside. Are you really okay? She asked quietly. Ask me again in a week, after the board meeting and her surgery and whatever fallout comes from all this. I'm serious, Ethan. He thought about Victoria's face when he'd kissed her, about the way she'd trembled when saying her vows, about Margaret's flowers and Father Mike's concern. I don't know if I'm okay, he admitted, but I know I made the right choice, and sometimes that has to be enough. Susan squeezed his shoulder. Sarah would be proud of you. I hope you know that. The words settled into him, warm and aching. He looked at Sarah's photo on the mantel, frozen in time, forever young, forever gone. I hope so too, he whispered. That afternoon, while Daisy watched cartoons, Ethan sat at his kitchen table and called his shop. Jimmy, it's me. I need you to manage things for the next few days, maybe longer. Boss, you just got married to a woman you barely know and now you're taking time off? This is the weirdest midlife crisis I've ever witnessed. It's not a midlife crisis. Then what is it? Ethan looked at the gold band on his finger. It's me trying to be someone who shows up when it matters. Can you handle the shop or not? Yeah, I can handle it, but Ethan, be careful, okay? I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but it feels big. It is big. That's exactly why I can't walk away from it. After hanging up, Ethan spent the evening in the strange liminal space between his old life and whatever came next. He made dinner, helped Daisy with her bath, read her 3 stories before bed. Normal routines in an increasingly abnormal situation. His phone buzzed around 9. Victoria. Board meeting confirmed for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Richard's bringing his full legal team. This is going to be ugly. Ethan typed back, I'll be there. What do you need from me? Just stand there and look like you believe in me, that's all. Just believe in me when everyone else in that room is waiting for me to fail. I can do that, because I do believe in you. The response took a while to come. When it did, it was simple. Thank you. That means more than you know. Ethan fell asleep that night thinking about tomorrow, about walking into a boardroom full of strangers who would judge every word he said and every gesture he made, about standing beside a woman he'd married after knowing her for 3 days, about the weight of the ring on his finger and the promise it represented. Somewhere across the city, Victoria was probably lying awake too, running scenarios and strategies, preparing for battle. They were married now. Legally, officially, irrevocably married. At least until they decided they weren't. The thought should have terrified him more than it did. Instead, as sleep finally claimed him, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. The sense that he wasn't facing tomorrow alone. That someone, somewhere, was in this with him. Even if this was completely insane. Especially because it was completely insane. The Hale Industries building occupied an entire block in the financial district, all glass and steel reaching 40 stories into the gray sky. Ethan stood on the sidewalk at 1:45, staring up at it and feeling completely out of place in his funeral suit and the gold ring that still felt foreign on his finger. His phone buzzed. Victoria. I'm in my office, 38th floor. Security will send you up. The lobby was marble and chrome, with a reception desk that looked like a spaceship control panel. The security guard, a different one from the night crew, scanned Ethan's driver's license and made a call before handing him a visitor badge. "Mrs. Hale is expecting you," the guard said, and the title hit Ethan like a physical thing. Mrs. Hale, his wife. The elevator was glass-walled, providing a nauseating view of the city as it climbed. By the 38th floor, Ethan could see the entire downtown spread out like a circuit board, tiny cars and tinier people going about their lives with no idea that somewhere in this building, two strangers were about to defend a marriage that was barely 24 hours old. Victoria's assistant met him at the elevator, a sharp woman in her 30s named Caroline, who looked him over with barely concealed curiosity. "Mr. Cole," she said, extending her hand, "I've heard a lot about you in the last 12 hours. All terrible, I'm sure. Actually, Victoria speaks very highly of you, which is remarkable considering she usually speaks highly of no one." Caroline led him down a corridor lined with abstract art and awards in glass cases. "Fair warning, she's in full battle mode right now. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, and Richard's been making calls all morning." They stopped at a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Through the glass wall, Ethan could see Victoria standing at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing sharply as she spoke. She wore a charcoal suit that looked like armor, her hair pulled back severely, every inch the corporate warrior. She saw him and held up one finger. "Give me a minute." Ethan waited while Caroline returned to her desk, leaving him alone in the hallway to feel increasingly like an imposter. When Victoria finally emerged, she looked exhausted beneath the professional polish. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd slept as poorly as he had. "You came," she said, and he heard the relief in her voice. "I said I would. People say a lot of things." She echoed her own words from yesterday, but this time they carried weight. "Come inside. We have 5 minutes before we need to go down to the boardroom, and I need to prepare you." Her office was immaculate. Everything in its place, nothing personal except a single photograph on the credenza of a younger Victoria with an older woman who shared her sharp cheekbones. Mother, Ethan guessed, though Victoria didn't offer explanation. "Sit," she said, gesturing to one of the chairs facing her desk. "Here's what's going to happen. Richard is going to present the background check results. He's going to paint our marriage as a desperate move by someone who's losing control. He'll argue that I'm too compromised medically and emotionally to make sound decisions about the merger. And our play? The truth. We got married yesterday. We have a license, witnesses, legal documentation. Yes, it was quick, but people get married quickly all the time, especially when facing medical crises. We're two adults who found each other at the right moment and decided not to waste time." "Do you think they'll believe that?" Victoria's smile was sharp. "They don't have to believe it. They just have to not be able to prove otherwise. And the beauty of it is, it's not a lie anymore. We are married. Whatever our reasons, the fact is legally true. What do you need from me in there? Don't speak unless spoken to directly. Let me handle Richard. But if someone asks you a direct question, answer honestly. Don't try to spin or justify. Just be yourself." She paused, studying him, which is apparently someone who shows up when it matters. The words echoed what Jimmy had said yesterday, what Ethan had told himself. Someone who shows up. "Okay," he said. "I can do that." Victoria checked her watch. "We should go. The boardroom is on 40. Whatever happens in there, whatever Richard says, don't react. Don't get angry on my behalf. The moment we show emotion, we lose." They took a private elevator to the 40th floor, riding in silence. Ethan could feel the tension radiating off Victoria in waves. When the doors opened, she took a breath, squared her shoulders, and transformed into someone untouchable. The boardroom was designed to intimidate. A long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, windows overlooking the city, abstract art that probably cost more than Ethan's house. 11 people were already seated, Richard at the far end looking like a king at his court. Margaret Chen sat near the middle, and she caught Ethan's eye with a small nod of acknowledgement. The others, various ages and levels of corporate polish, watched Victoria and Ethan enter with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. "Victoria," Richard said, his tone professionally pleasant and utterly false. "How good of you to join us. And you brought your husband. How domestic." Richard, Victoria's voice was ice. Shall we begin? I believe you called this emergency session. Indeed. Richard stood, and Ethan saw he had a folder in front of him, thick with papers. I've called us here today to discuss a matter of critical importance to this company's future. Specifically, the fitness of our CEO to lead us through the proposed Meridian merger. My fitness has never been in question, Victoria said, taking her seat at the opposite end of the table. Ethan stood behind her chair, unsure of the protocol, but unwilling to sit when she was standing her ground. Hasn't it? Richard opened his folder. In the past week, we've learned several concerning facts. First, that you've been concealing a serious medical diagnosis while negotiating a multi-billion-dollar merger. Second, that you've apparently been in a relationship, serious enough to result in marriage, that none of your board members knew about. Third, that this marriage occurred with remarkable speed, just days after I happened to see you at the hospital. He spread papers across the table, the background check, medical records that shouldn't have been accessible, copies of the marriage license. These facts, Richard continued, paint a picture of someone who is either dangerously secretive or increasingly unstable. Neither quality inspires confidence in leadership. Are you quite finished? Victoria's voice could have cut glass. Not remotely, Richard smiled. I'd like to hear from Mr. Cole himself. Tell us, Ethan, and I can call you Ethan, can I? How exactly did you meet Victoria? Every eye in the room turned to Ethan. He felt the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their skepticism. This was the moment Victoria had warned him about, the moment they'd try to crack him open and find the lie inside. We met at St. Catherine's Hospital, Ethan said, keeping his voice steady. In the oncology wing, I was waiting for test results for my daughter. Victoria was dealing with her own medical situation. We sat in the same corridor and started talking. How romantic, Richard said. A chance meeting in a hospital. And this was when, last week? Thursday. A murmur went through the room. Richard's smile widened. Thursday, 4 days ago, and you married her yesterday. Yes. That's remarkably fast, even by Las Vegas standards. My wife died of cancer 3 years ago, Ethan said, and he felt Victoria stiffen in front of him. He hadn't planned to mention Sarah, but the words came anyway. I watched her go through diagnosis, treatment, decline, death, all of it. So when I met someone else facing cancer, someone who was terrified and alone, I understood what that meant. And when she needed support, real, documented support, I offered it. We got married because it was the right thing to do. Not because it was romantic or conventional, but because sometimes the right choice is the one that makes no sense to anyone else. The room was silent. Even Richard seemed momentarily at a loss. Margaret spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. I met Ethan yesterday morning. He was there when Victoria and I discussed her diagnosis and treatment plan. He seems genuine, supportive, and completely committed to helping her through this. I see no reason to question the validity of their marriage. With respect, Margaret, said another board member, a man in his 50s named Harrison, this looks like a strategic move designed to counter concerns about Victoria's stability. The timing is too convenient. Or, Margaret countered, the timing makes perfect sense. Victoria received a cancer diagnosis and found someone who understood what she was facing. People do make life-changing decisions when confronted with mortality. It's called being human. It's called being desperate, Richard interjected. And desperation leads to poor judgment, which brings me to my main concern. He pulled out another document. I move that we vote today on the Meridian merger. Not in 3 days as scheduled, but now, while we're all present, while we can make a clear-headed decision about whether our CEO is fit to lead us through this transition. That's not protocol, Victoria said sharply. We have scheduled votes for a reason. We also have emergency provisions for situations exactly like this. When leadership is compromised, the board has the right to accelerate critical decisions. The trap was perfect. If Victoria fought too hard, she looked unstable. If she accepted the vote, she faced it before she'd secured the support she needed. Either way, Richard had engineered a scenario where he controlled the outcome. I second the motion, Harrison said. Margaret looked at Victoria with something like apology in her eyes. We need to vote on whether to accelerate the merger vote. Victoria's hand found Ethan's where it rested on the back of her chair. He squeezed back. A silent promise that he was there, he was staying, he believed in her. Fine, Victoria said. Let's vote. The accelerated vote passed 7-4. They would vote on the Meridian merger today, right now, instead of in 3 days. Richard stood again, moving into presentation mode. The Meridian merger represents an opportunity to expand our portfolio into commercial real estate on the West Coast. The terms are favorable, the timeline is aggressive, and the potential returns are significant. However, I have concerns about execution, specifically whether our current leadership has the stability and focus to manage such a complex transition while also dealing with personal medical crises. He laid out his case systematically, professionally, making it sound like concern for the company rather than a personal attack. He suggested bringing in an interim CEO to handle the merger. He painted a picture of Victoria as brilliant but compromised, worthy of respect but not trust. It was masterfully done, and Ethan watched Victoria's expression remain neutral throughout, giving nothing away. When Richard finished, Margaret spoke. I'd like to hear from Victoria directly, about her plans for managing both the merger and her treatment. Victoria stood, and Ethan felt her hand leave his. She walked to the windows, looking out at the city she'd helped build, before turning back to face the board. Richard is right about one thing, she said. I am facing a medical crisis. Stage 1 breast cancer, surgery scheduled for next week, followed by radiation. It's serious, it's scary, and yes, it's going to require time and energy to manage. She paused, letting that truth settle. But here's what Richard isn't telling you. Stage 1 cancer has a 95% survival rate. My prognosis is excellent. My doctors have cleared me to continue working through treatment. And unlike Richard's suggestion, I don't need an interim CEO to hold my hand through a merger I've been planning for 8 months. She moved back to the table, placing both palms flat on the mahogany surface. You all know me. I built this company from a single property development into what it is today. I've negotiated deals while working 20-hour days. I've managed crises that would have destroyed lesser companies. And yes, I've done it largely alone because I didn't trust anyone else to care as much as I did. Her eyes found Ethan's. But I'm not alone anymore. I have a partner who understands that showing up matters more than looking good doing it. I have a support system. And I have the same strategic mind, the same drive, and the same commitment to this company that I've always had. The only thing that's changed is that I'm willing to ask for help when I need it. She straightened, and Ethan saw every board member leaning forward, engaged despite themselves. So here's my counteroffer to Richard's concern. Vote yes on the Meridian merger. Let me execute the deal exactly as planned. If at any point my medical treatment interferes with my ability to lead, if I miss deadlines, if quality suffers, if the merger shows signs of failure, then we can revisit the question of interim leadership. But don't pull me from a game I'm winning because you're afraid I might stumble. The silence that followed was heavy with calculation. Ethan watched the board members exchange glances, weighing loyalty against risk, profit against fear. I have a question, said a younger woman Ethan hadn't heard speak yet. For Mr. Cole. Victoria tensed. Ethan stepped forward. Ask, he said. What do you do when your wife is working 80-hour weeks on a major merger while also recovering from surgery? How do you support that without enabling self-destruction? It was a genuine question, not a trap. Ethan could hear the concern in it. I remind her that she's human, he said. I make sure she eats something that isn't coffee. I tell her when she's pushing too hard, even though she'll ignore me. And I stay, whether she's winning or losing, because that's what marriage means. Not fixing everything, but being present for all of it. The woman nodded, satisfied. Richard, however, looked like he'd tasted something sour. Very touching, Richard said. But sentiment doesn't close billion-dollar deals. I call for a vote on the Meridian merger. All in favor? Hands went up slowly. Margaret's immediately. 3 others followed, then a 5th, a 6th. 7 votes in favor. Opposed? Richard asked, his own hand already raised. 4 hands, including Richard's. 7-4. The merger passed. Victoria had won. Richard's face went carefully blank, but Ethan saw the fury in his eyes. The merger passes, he said tightly. Victoria, I hope you understand the responsibility you've just accepted. I've understood it from the beginning, Richard. That's why I'm the CEO, and you're not. The meeting dissolved into side conversations and people packing up papers. Margaret came over to Victoria and pulled her into a quick hug. "Well played," Margaret said quietly. "But he's not done. You know that, right?" "I know. But I won today. That's enough." Margaret turned to Ethan. "Take care of her. She's terrible at taking care of herself." "I'm getting that impression." After Margaret left, other board members approached, some to offer congratulations, others to make clear they'd be watching closely. Through it all, Victoria remained composed, shaking hands and accepting well wishes with the grace of someone who'd won battles before. Only when they were alone in the elevator, descending back to her office, did she finally let the mask crack. "I can't believe that worked," she said, leaning against the wall. "You were incredible in there. I was terrified. The entire time I was convinced it would fall apart." "It didn't. You won." Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, and Ethan saw something shift in her expression. "We won. You standing there, saying those things about Sarah, about showing up, that mattered. Margaret was right. You being there changed the dynamic." The elevator reached the 38th floor. They walked back to Victoria's office in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Less tense, more settled. Inside her office, Victoria collapsed into her desk chair and pressed her hands to her face. "I have 6 days until surgery," she said through her fingers. 6 days to finalize the merger contracts, prepare the team for my absence, and somehow not lose my mind. "Then we start with coffee and food," Ethan said. "When's the last time you ate something?" "I had coffee this morning." "That's not food. It's food adjacent." Ethan pulled out his phone and ordered from a deli 2 blocks away. Sandwiches, soup, actual sustenance. While they waited for delivery, Victoria walked him through the next 6 days of her schedule. It was brutal, meetings stacked on meetings, conference calls, document reviews, strategic planning sessions. "How do you normally do this?" Ethan asked. "Caffeine and controlled panic. That's not a sustainable model." "It's gotten me this far." The food arrived and Ethan made her eat half a sandwich before letting her return to work. While she took calls and reviewed contracts, he sat in one of her visitor chairs and answered emails on his phone, dealing with the shop business he'd been neglecting. Around 6, Caroline poked her head in. "Victoria, you have the West Coast call in 5 minutes." "Cancel it," Victoria said without looking up from her laptop. "You've canceled it twice already." "Then cancel it a 3rd time. They'll live." Caroline's eyes flicked to Ethan, silently asking for help. "Victoria," Ethan said gently, "you can't cancel everything. Watch me. You just won the merger vote by promising you could handle the workload. Canceling calls isn't handling it." Victoria's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. She looked up at him, irritation flickering across her face before fading into resignation. "Fine. Tell them I'll call in 10 minutes. Caroline disappeared and Victoria glared at Ethan. "You're supposed to be supportive, not annoying. Sometimes support looks like telling you things you don't want to hear." "I already have a therapist for that." "Yeah, but your therapist isn't married to you." The words hung in the air, a reminder of what they were, legally and impossibly. Victoria took the call, and Ethan listened to her negotiate with someone in Los Angeles about property values and development timelines. She was sharp, focused, every bit the CEO who'd built an empire. But Ethan also noticed the way she rubbed her temples when she thought no one was looking, the slight tremor in her hand when she reached for her water glass. The call lasted an hour. When it ended, Victoria closed her laptop with more force than necessary. "I need to go home," she said. "I need to shower and sleep for 8 hours and pretend the world doesn't exist." "That sounds like a good plan." They rode the elevator down together, and Ethan walked her to her car in the parking garage, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than he made in 2 years. "Thank you," Victoria said, unlocking the door. "For today. For standing there and being exactly what I needed you to be." "You're welcome. What time is your surgery on Monday?" 6 in the morning, check in at 5. "Do you want me there?" Victoria studied him, and Ethan saw her working through the question, weighing what she needed against what she felt comfortable asking for. "Yes," she finally said. "If you're willing, Dr. Chen said I need someone to drive me home after, to stay with me for the first 24 hours. I was going to hire a nurse, but if you're offering, I'm offering. I'll be there at 4:30. That gives us time to get you checked in. Oh, what about Daisy? Grammy Susan will stay with her. It's handled. Victoria nodded, something like gratitude and disbelief mixed in her expression. Okay, thank you. She got in her car and drove away, leaving Ethan standing in a parking garage that smelled like exhaust and money, wearing a suit that didn't fit right and a ring that was becoming more familiar by the hour. His phone rang. Grammy Susan. How did it go? She asked. Victoria won her board vote. The merger's approved. And how are you? Ethan thought about the question. He'd just spent 3 hours in a corporate boardroom defending a marriage that was 4 days old to people who thought he was either a con artist or an idiot. He'd publicly discussed Sarah's death. He'd committed to being present for major surgery for someone he barely knew. Honestly, he said, I have no idea. But I'm still showing up, so that's something. That's everything, Susan corrected. Showing up is always everything. When Ethan got home, Daisy was waiting with a drawing she'd made at school. Stick figures labeled Daddy, me, and Victoria, standing under a rainbow. My teacher asked if the drawing was of our family, Daisy said, watching his face carefully. I said yes. Was that okay? Ethan looked at the 3 figures, one tall, one small, one somewhere in between. Family. The word felt too big and too small simultaneously. Yeah, kiddo, he said, putting the drawing on the fridge with a magnet. That was okay. That night, after Daisy was asleep, Ethan sat on his couch and called Victoria. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding exhausted. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, just checking in. You said you wanted to pretend the world doesn't exist, so I thought I'd be the one small part of the world that's allowed to exist. He heard her laugh softly. That's unexpectedly sweet. Don't spread it around. I have a reputation as a grumpy mechanic to maintain. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. Daisy's drawing, Victoria's absurdly organized closet, the sandwich he'd made her eat. Normal conversation between 2 people who happened to be married. When they hung up, Ethan realized he was smiling. The next 5 days blurred together in a pattern of routine and surreal interruption. Ethan worked at the shop in the mornings, picked up Daisy from school in the afternoons, and spent evenings either at home or at Victoria's office, depending on what she needed. Sometimes he just sat there while she worked, a silent presence that seemed to help her focus. Other times he actively intervened, making her eat or sleep or take a walk around the block. They fell into a rhythm that felt almost natural, married people learning each other's patterns, even if the marriage itself was anything but normal. On Friday evening, Victoria came to his apartment for the first time. She'd called ahead, asking if it was okay, and Ethan had spent 20 minutes frantically cleaning before realizing that was absurd. She wasn't judging his home. She was just visiting her husband. Her husband. The phrase still felt foreign. Daisy had been nervous about meeting Victoria, but Grammy Susan had talked her through it, explaining that sometimes adults needed friends who were also family, and that was okay. When Victoria knocked, Ethan answered to find her looking uncertain in jeans and a simple sweater, the most casual he'd ever seen her. Hi, she said. Hi, come in. Daisy peeked around from the living room, clutching Sarah the rabbit. Victoria crouched down to her level, not forcing closeness but acknowledging her presence. You must be Daisy, Victoria said. Your dad talks about you constantly. He says you're an excellent artist. I draw rainbows, Daisy said quietly. I saw one of your rainbows on the fridge. It's really good. Much better than anything I could draw. Daddy says you're sick, like Mommy was. The room went silent. Ethan opened his mouth to redirect, but Victoria held up a hand. Yeah, Victoria said to Daisy. I am sick like your mommy was, but the doctors caught it early, so I'm going to get better. Daddy says you're scared. I am scared. Being sick is scary. Daisy thought about this. Then she walked over and handed Victoria the stuffed rabbit. Sarah helps when I'm scared, Daisy said. You can borrow her. Victoria's eyes went bright with tears she didn't let fall. She accepted the rabbit carefully, like it was made of glass. Thank you, Daisy. That's very kind. I'll take good care of her. I know. Daddy says you're good at taking care of things. I'm trying to be. They stayed for dinner, pizza that Ethan ordered because cooking felt too complicated with the emotional weight in the room. Daisy warmed up to Victoria gradually, showing her the rainbow drawing and explaining in detail the proper way to color so the colors didn't touch. Watching them together, Ethan felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't part of the plan. The plan was legal protection and corporate strategy, not his daughter lending her most precious possession to a woman who was supposed to be temporary. After Daisy went to bed, Victoria sat on Ethan's couch holding Sarah the rabbit and looking overwhelmed. "That was intense," she said. "She likes you. She's a good kid. You've done an incredible job with her." "I'm just trying not to screw her up too badly." Victoria smiled. "I think you're succeeding." She looked down at the stuffed rabbit. "I can't keep this, though. It's clearly important to her. She wouldn't have offered if she didn't want you to have it. At least for now, for the surgery." "Ethan, this is getting complicated." "I know. We said clean separation when this is over. But how do we do that now? How do I walk away from your daughter after she's trusted me with her most precious thing?" Ethan sat down beside her, not touching but close enough to feel her presence. "I don't know, but that's a problem for future us. Right now, you have surgery in 3 days. That's all we need to focus on." Victoria nodded, but she looked unconvinced. The weekend passed in preparation. Victoria finalized merger documents and delegated responsibilities. Ethan arranged his schedule and made sure Grammy Susan was set to stay with Daisy for as long as needed. Sunday night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed thinking about the surgery, about the recovery, about Victoria facing anesthesia and scalpels, and the fear that came with letting someone cut into you. His phone buzzed at midnight. "Victoria. Are you awake?" "Yeah." "Me too. Can't shut my brain off." "Want to talk?" She called instead of texting, and they talked until 2 in the morning about everything and nothing. About her mother who died when Victoria was 20. About building her company from nothing. About the fear of losing control under anesthesia. "What if something goes wrong?" Victoria asked, her voice small in the darkness. "What if the surgery isn't as simple as they think? Then we deal with it. Together. That's what we agreed to." "You keep saying we, like it's real." "It is real. Maybe not in the way most marriages are, but it's real." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad you're going to be there tomorrow." "Me too." "Try to sleep, Victoria. You need rest." "You too. Good night, Ethan." "Good night." When morning came, cold and dark at 4:30, Ethan kissed Daisy's sleeping forehead and drove to Victoria's apartment. She was waiting in the lobby, looking small in sweatpants and a hoodie, clutching Sarah the rabbit. "Ready?" Ethan asked. "No, but let's go anyway." "But—" They drove through empty streets to the hospital, the same hospital where they'd met 6 days and a lifetime ago. 6 days. That was all it had been. 6 days since Victoria had sat beside him and whispered a desperate request. Now she was his wife, and he was driving her to surgery, and somewhere along the way they'd stopped pretending this was purely transactional. At check-in, a nurse asked for Victoria's emergency contact. Victoria looked at Ethan. "You," she said. "Put down my husband, Ethan Cole." He filled out the paperwork while Victoria changed into a hospital gown. When they took her back to pre-op, Ethan sat beside her bed holding her hand while she tried not to show how terrified she was. "You're going to be fine," he said. "You don't know that." "No, but I believe it anyway." Dr. Chen came in to review the procedure one more time. The anesthesiologist explained what Victoria would feel. Everything was routine, professional, designed to be reassuring. But Ethan saw the fear in Victoria's eyes when they said it was time. "I'll be here when you wake up," he promised. "Promise?" "Promise." They wheeled her away and Ethan was left alone in a waiting room that looked exactly like the one where they'd met, sitting in a plastic chair that might have been the same one, waiting for someone else's test results to determine someone else's future. Except Victoria wasn't someone else anymore. She was his wife. Legally, impossibly, undeniably his wife. And he was more terrified than he'd been waiting for his own results. The surgery took 3 hours. Ethan paced, sat, paced again. He texted Grammy Susan updates. He called the shop to check in. He did everything except acknowledge how much this mattered. When Dr. Chen finally emerged, Ethan was on his feet before she finished pushing through the door. "The surgery went perfectly, doctor," Chen said, smiling. "We removed the tumor with clear margins. No complications. She's in recovery now, and you can see her in about 20 minutes. The relief was dizzying. Ethan sat down hard in the nearest chair. Thank you, he managed. She's going to be groggy and sore, but she'll be fine. You're cleared to take her home this afternoon, but remember, she'll need help for the next few days. No driving, no lifting, lots of rest. I'll make sure she follows orders. Dr. Chen laughed. Good luck with that. Your wife isn't exactly known for following orders. When they finally led him back to see Victoria, she was awake but fuzzy, her eyes unfocused and a small smile on her face. Hi, she said, the words slurred slightly. Hi. How do you feel? Floaty. Also sore. Mostly floaty. She reached for his hand. You stayed. Of course I stayed. You keep showing up. It's weird, but nice. Nice weird. The pain medication was clearly strong. I told the nurse you were my husband, and she said how lovely. And I almost laughed because it's not lovely. It's insane, but also maybe it is lovely? I don't know. I'm very drugged right now. Ethan squeezed her hand, smiling despite everything. Yeah, you are. Ethan? Yeah? I'm glad I met you. Even if it was in a hospital, even if this whole thing is crazy, I'm glad. Something in Ethan's chest cracked open. I'm glad too. Victoria's eyes drifted closed, and within seconds she was asleep again, her hand still in his. Ethan sat there watching her breathe, the stranger he'd married, this woman who'd trusted him with her surgery and her fear and her stuffed rabbit borrowed from his daughter. And he realized with startling clarity that somewhere in the last 6 days, this had stopped being about corporate strategy or legal protection. It had become something else entirely, something real, something he wasn't sure either of them was ready for. Victoria's penthouse apartment looked like something from an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture in grays and whites, everything precisely placed. It was beautiful and cold and utterly impersonal, which told Ethan more about Victoria's life before this week than any conversation had. Getting her from the car to the apartment was an exercise in stubbornness management. She insisted she could walk on her own despite the anesthesia still making her movements unsteady. Ethan ended up with his arm around her waist, supporting most of her weight while she pretended he wasn't. I'm fine, she said for the 4th time. You're barely standing. That's just your opinion. That's objective reality. She stumbled slightly on the threshold, and Ethan caught her more firmly. Okay, fine. Maybe I need a little help. He got her settled on the couch with pillows supporting her arm, pain medication within reach, water on the side table. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything gold. You don't have to stay, Victoria said, though her eyes said the opposite. I can manage from here. Dr. Chen said someone needs to be with you for 24 hours. I'm staying. Ethan, you have Daisy, who is having the time of her life with Grammy Susan. They're making cookies and watching princess movies. She doesn't need me tonight. You do. Victoria looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. Thank you, she said quietly. Ethan explored the kitchen while Victoria dozed, finding it stocked with coffee and protein bars, but little actual food. He ordered groceries delivered, then made soup from the limited ingredients available, canned broth, vegetables that were on the edge of wilting, pasta he found in the back of a cabinet. When Victoria woke, disoriented and in pain, he was there with medication and soup and a steady presence that asked for nothing in return. This is surreal, she said, accepting the bowl carefully. You, here, taking care of me? A week ago, I didn't know you existed. A week ago, you were planning to face this surgery alone. I've done everything alone. It's easier that way. Easier isn't always better. Victoria ate slowly, wincing occasionally when movement pulled at her incision. What happens now? She asked. After tonight? After the 24 hours are up? I don't know. What do you want to happen? I want to not have cancer. I want the merger to close smoothly. I want Richard to spontaneously combust. She set down the soup bowl. But what I want regarding us, I have no idea. Ethan sat in the chair across from her. We could keep going, as we have been. Playing house while maintaining separate lives? Is that what we're doing? Playing? I don't know what else to call it. We got married for strategic reasons. Everything since then has been, she gestured vaguely, adjacent to that strategy. Has it? Ethan leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, this stopped being strategy around the time your daughter lent you her most precious possession. Or maybe when you held my hand through my doctor's appointment. Or when I stood in that boardroom and meant every word I said about showing up for you. Victoria's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or fear or hope. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we stop pretending this is temporary. Maybe we acknowledge that something real is happening here, even if neither of us planned for it. Ethan, we barely know each other. I know you reorganize your closet when you're stressed. I know you take your coffee black with occasional cream. I know you're terrified of losing control, but even more terrified of being alone. I know you cry like someone who's forgotten how, and you trust like someone who's been burned before. He paused. Maybe that's not everything, but it's not nothing either. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her hand unconsciously touching the gold band on her finger. This wasn't supposed to happen. We had rules, conditions, an exit strategy. I know. So what changed? Ethan thought about it, about the moment in the hospital corridor, about Victoria's laughter in his truck, about Daisy's drawing on the fridge. Everything changed, and nothing changed. We're still two people who needed each other at the right moment. We're just also becoming two people who might want each other beyond the need. Want is dangerous, Victoria said. Want makes you vulnerable. So does cancer, so does corporate warfare. You're already vulnerable, Victoria. The question is whether you're willing to be vulnerable with someone who's choosing to stay. Before Victoria could respond, her phone rang. She looked at the screen and her expression hardened. It's Richard. Don't answer it. I have to. He'll just keep calling. She accepted the call, putting it on speaker. Richard? Victoria, I heard about your surgery. I trust everything went well? His tone was professionally sympathetic and completely insincere. Perfectly well, thank you. I'm so glad. However, I'm calling about a concern that's come to my attention regarding the Meridian merger timeline. Victoria's hand tightened on the phone. What concern? Well, given your recovery period, I think it's prudent that we assign someone to manage the day-to-day negotiations. Just temporarily, you understand, to ensure nothing falls through the cracks while you're healing. The merger is on schedule, Richard. I have a team handling the details. Yes, but your team reports to you, and you'll be on medical leave for at least 2 weeks. That's a significant gap in leadership at a critical time. It was a power play disguised as concern. Ethan could see Victoria processing, weighing her options, calculating the political cost of fighting versus conceding. I'll be working remotely, Victoria said. My doctor cleared it, light duty, but I'll be available for all critical decisions. With all due respect, you just had surgery this morning. Perhaps you're not in the best position to assess your own capacity. With all due respect, Richard, I'm in the best position to assess my capacity, and I'm telling you I can manage this merger while recovering. I see. Richard's voice went cold. Then I'll have to raise this concern with the full board. We have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. If you're unable to, I'm completely able, Victoria cut in. But if you want to waste the board's time with another emergency meeting, be my guest. I'll be there. You just had surgery. Surely you're not planning to attend board meetings this week. Watch me. There was a pause. Then Richard said, I'll be in touch, and disconnected. Victoria dropped the phone on the couch and pressed her good hand to her face. He's not going to stop. Even after I won the vote, even after the merger was approved, he's going to keep coming at me until he finds a weakness he can exploit. Then don't give him one. I just had surgery, Ethan. That's a pretty significant weakness. Only if you let it be. Ethan moved to sit beside her on the couch. You told the board you could handle this. So handle it. Work remotely like you said. Delegate what you can. And when Richard calls another meeting, you show up looking strong and in control. I can barely lift my arm. So you bring your husband to lift things for you. That's what I'm here for. Victoria looked at him, and Ethan saw her working through the implications. You'd do that? Take more time off work to help me with corporate warfare? Jimmy can handle the shop for another week, and yeah, I'd do that, because that's what partners do. Partners? Victoria repeated. Is that what we are now? I don't know. What do you want us to be? Victoria's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it and her expression shifted. It's Caroline. Richard just sent a memo to the board requesting an emergency meeting for Thursday, 3 days from now. Then we have 3 days to prepare. Ethan, I'm on pain medication. I can barely think straight. So rest tonight. Tomorrow we start building your case. By Thursday, you'll be ready. Victoria studied him with something like wonder. Why are you doing this? The surgery's over. The immediate crisis has passed. You could walk away right now, and you'd have fulfilled every obligation you agreed to. I could, Ethan acknowledged, but I don't want to. Somewhere in the last week, this stopped being about obligation and started being about choice. I'm choosing to stay, Victoria. The question is whether you're willing to let me. Before she could answer, her phone rang again. This time, it was Margaret. I heard about Richard's memo, Margaret said without preamble. He's claiming you're medically unfit to lead the merger execution. He's got Harrison and 2 others backing him. Then I'll need 4 votes to maintain majority, Victoria said, her strategic mind automatically calculating despite the exhaustion. You, Thomas, Jennifer, and Michael. Michael's wavering. He's worried about the optics of supporting a CEO who's recovering from surgery. Then I'll convince him otherwise. Can you set up a call for tomorrow? Victoria, you should be resting. I'll rest when Richard stops trying to steal my company. Margaret sighed. You're impossible. But yes, I'll set up the call. Take care of yourself, dear. And tell that husband of yours I said he better be taking care of you, too. After the call ended, Victoria leaned back against the couch cushions, exhaustion written in every line of her body. I should start working on talking points for Michael. If I can get him to commit, Richard doesn't have the votes to... Tomorrow, Ethan interrupted. Tonight you rest. Doctor's orders, remember? I don't take orders well. I'm learning that. But humor me anyway. He made her take her evening medication, helped her change into comfortable clothes without looking when she needed privacy, and settled her in bed with extra pillows supporting her surgical site. The bedroom was as impersonal as the rest of the apartment. Expensive furniture, no photographs, nothing that suggested a life lived rather than a space occupied. This place looks like a hotel, Ethan observed. That's intentional. Hotels are temporary, easy to leave. You've been here how long? 5 years? And it still looks like you're ready to check out at any moment. Victoria turned to look at him. What's your point? No point, just an observation. He pulled a chair next to the bed. I'm going to stay here tonight, in case you need anything. There's a guest room. That's too far away. If you need help in the night, I want to hear you. Ethan, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Victoria's eyes were already closing, the medication and exhaustion finally overwhelming her determination. You're stubborn, she murmured. So are you. We're well matched that way. She was asleep within minutes, her breathing evening out into a peaceful rhythm. Ethan sat in the chair watching her, this woman who'd built walls so high, she'd forgotten what it felt like to be protected instead of protecting. His phone buzzed quietly. A text from Daisy via Grammy Susan's phone. Is Victoria okay? Tell her Sarah Rabbit says get better soon. Ethan smiled and typed back, She's okay. Sleeping. I'll tell her. Another text. Daddy, are you going to stay married to her after she's better? The question hit harder than it should have. Ethan stared at it for a long moment before typing. I don't know yet, kiddo. But whatever happens, we'll talk about it together. I promise. Okay. Love you, Daddy. Love you too. The night passed slowly. Ethan dozed in the chair, waking whenever Victoria stirred. Twice she needed help getting to the bathroom. Once she woke disoriented and in pain, and he was there with medication and water and steady reassurance that she was safe. She was healing. Everything was okay. Around 3 a.m, Victoria woke more fully and found him still sitting beside the bed. You're still here, she said, her voice rough with sleep. Where else would I be? Most people would have left by now, gone home to their own bed. I'm not most people. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Sarah was lucky to have had you. The name hit Ethan unexpectedly, a knife between ribs that had started to heal. I wasn't enough to save her. That wasn't your job. Saving her was the doctor's job, and they couldn't do it either. Your job was to love her while she was here. And from everything you've told me, you did that perfectly. Ethan felt tears burning behind his eyes. I haven't talked about her, really talked about her since the funeral. It hurt too much. And now? It still hurts. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the hurt means she mattered. She did matter, Victoria said softly, and she'd want you to be happy again. I'm guessing she wasn't the kind of person who'd want you to spend the rest of your life alone. No, she wasn't. Ethan wiped his eyes. The night before she went into hospice, she made me promise something. She said, "Don't you dare spend the next 40 years being sad. I forbid it. Find someone who makes you laugh again, who reminds you that life is for living, and don't you dare feel guilty about it." Sounds like she was pretty wise. She was, about everything except picking fights with cancer. That one she lost. Victoria reached out with her good hand, and Ethan took it. I'm sorry you lost her, and I'm sorry if being with me feels like a betrayal of her memory. It doesn't, Ethan said, and he was surprised to find it true. It feels like maybe I'm finally keeping the promise I made her, to not spend my life alone, to find someone worth showing up for. Even if that someone is a stubborn CEO with cancer and corporate enemies. Especially then. They sat in the darkness holding hands, two people who'd found each other in a hospital corridor and somehow built something real from desperation and need and unexpected choice. Ethan? Victoria's voice was small. Yeah? I'm scared. Not about Thursday's meeting or Richard's schemes, about this, about us, about what happens if I let myself need you, and then you leave. I'm scared too, Ethan admitted, because I watched the person I love die, and I'm terrified of losing someone again. But I'm more terrified of never trying, of playing it safe and missing something real because I was too afraid to risk it. What if we're terrible at this, at being actually married instead of strategically married? Then we learn, together. That's what marriage is supposed to be anyway, two people figuring it out as they go. Victoria's grip on his hand tightened. I don't know how to do this, the vulnerability part, the trusting someone else part. Neither do I, not anymore, but we can figure it out together. Together, Victoria repeated, like she was testing the word. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. Okay? Okay? Okay, let's try, actually try. Not as a strategy or a performance, but as two people who might actually want to build something real. Ethan felt something in his chest expand, warm and terrifying and hopeful all at once. Yeah? Yeah, but I'm going to be terrible at it sometimes. I'm going to work too much and forget to ask for help and push you away when I'm scared. And I'm going to hover and worry and probably drive you crazy with my need to fix things. So we'll be a disaster. Probably. But we'll be a disaster together. Exactly. Victoria smiled, and even in the darkness, Ethan could see it was genuine. Go to sleep, Ethan. You can't take care of me if you're exhausted. Only if you promise to wake me if you need anything. I promise. He started to settle back into the chair, but Victoria said, Wait, the bed's big enough for two, and the chair looks incredibly uncomfortable. Victoria, you just had surgery, so I need rest, not solitude. Just stay on your side, don't jostle me, and we'll be fine. Ethan hesitated, then kicked off his shoes and carefully settled onto the far side of the bed, maintaining distance but present. Within minutes, Victoria's breathing evened out again, and she slept more peacefully than she had all night. Ethan lay there in the darkness of her impersonal bedroom, listening to the sounds of the city through the windows, and thought about how much had changed in 7 days. A week ago, he'd been a mechanic and a father and nothing else. Now he was a husband, really a husband, not just legally, to a woman who was teaching him that showing up was its own kind of love. The next morning, Ethan woke to find Victoria already awake and trying to make coffee one-handed. Let me, he said, taking over the coffee maker. You're supposed to be resting. I've rested. Now I need coffee and a plan for convincing Michael to vote with me on Thursday. They spent the morning strategizing. Ethan made breakfast while Victoria worked through talking points, and by the time Caroline arrived at 10 with files and updates, they had a solid approach. The call with Michael happened at noon. Ethan listened as Victoria laid out her case. The merger was on track, Her recovery was ahead of schedule, and Richard's concerns were politically motivated rather than practically grounded. I appreciate that, Michael said, his voice tinny through the speakerphone. But Victoria, you have to understand how this looks. You kept your diagnosis secret, rushed into a marriage, and now you're recovering from surgery while trying to manage $1 billion merger. It's a lot. It is a lot, Victoria agreed. But I've built this company while managing a lot for 15 years. This situation is no different. Except you've never had a husband before. How do we know he's not influencing your decisions? How do we know this marriage isn't affecting your judgment? Ethan met Victoria's eyes. She nodded, giving him permission. Michael, Ethan said, this is Ethan Cole. I'm Victoria's husband, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that I have zero interest in her business decisions. I run an auto shop. I fix transmissions and replace brake pads. The only thing I influence Victoria to do is eat lunch and get 8 hours of sleep. There was a pause. Then Michael laughed. Fair enough. And you're really okay with her working through recovery? I'm really okay with supporting her through whatever she needs to do. That's what marriage means. Another pause. All right, Victoria. You've got my vote. But if this merger shows any signs of trouble, I reserve the right to revisit the leadership question. That's all I'm asking for, Victoria said. Thank you, Michael. After the call ended, Victoria sagged against the couch cushions. 4 votes secured. Richard can't force me out. You did it. We did it. She looked at him. Thank you for speaking up. Michael needed to hear from you. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. Victoria working remotely, Ethan providing support and forcing her to rest, Grammy Susan keeping Daisy while sending encouraging text. The merger progressed smoothly, with Victoria's team handling negotiations while she provided strategic oversight from her couch. By Thursday morning, Victoria was moving more easily. The pain managed with over-the-counter medication, her mind sharp despite the lingering fatigue. You don't have to come to the meeting, she told Ethan while they had coffee. I can handle Richard. I know you can, but I'm coming anyway. They arrived at Hale Industries at 1:30, Victoria moving carefully but confidently. The board members were already gathering, and Ethan saw the reactions when Victoria walked in, surprised that she was there at all, assessment of her condition, calculation of what it meant. Richard's face went carefully neutral when he saw them. Victoria, I'm surprised you felt well enough to attend. I'm recovering well, thank you. She took her seat at the table, Ethan standing behind her chair. Shall we begin? Richard laid out his concerns again. Victoria's medical situation, the demands of merger execution, the need for stability. It was the same argument as before, just repackaged. When he finished, Margaret spoke first. I've been in daily contact with Victoria all week. The merger is on schedule, all deadlines are being met, and the team reports no issues with leadership or direction. I see no reason for concern. Michael chimed in next. I spoke with Victoria and her husband earlier this week. I'm satisfied that she's managing both her health and the merger appropriately. One by one, the votes went Victoria's way. When the final count came, it was 8-3. Richard had lost decisively. Well, Richard said tightly, I'm glad we could resolve this matter, though I maintain my concerns about Richard. Victoria's voice cut through the room like a blade. Let me be very clear. I have breast cancer. I had surgery. I'm recovering well. None of this affects my ability to lead this company or execute the Meridian merger. If you want to continue challenging me, you're welcome to try. But understand that every time you do, you're wasting the board's time and this company's resources on personal vendettas instead of productive business. She stood, and Ethan saw every board member lean back slightly as if her presence had physical force. I built Hale Industries from nothing, Victoria continued. I sacrificed relationships, health, sleep, everything that wasn't directly related to growing this company. And yes, I kept my diagnosis private because I knew exactly what people like you would do with that information. Weaponize it, use it to paint me as weak, try to take what I've built. She placed both palms on the table, leaning forward despite the discomfort it must have caused. But here's what you didn't count on. I'm not alone anymore. I have a husband who reminds me that strength isn't refusing help, it's accepting it. I have a medical team that caught my cancer early. I have a board that sees through your political maneuvering, and I have 15 years of proven leadership that speaks louder than your concerns. The room was absolutely silent. So here's my proposal, Victoria said. Stop fighting me and start fighting for this company. Help me close this merger. Support the strategic vision we've all agreed upon. Be a productive board member instead of an antagonistic one. Can you do that, Richard? Richard's jaw was tight, but he nodded once. I can do that. Good. Then this meeting is adjourned. People filed out slowly, several pausing to congratulate Victoria or shake Ethan's hand. When the room finally emptied, leaving just Victoria and Ethan, she sat down heavily. That was intense, she said. That was incredible. You destroyed him. I didn't destroy him. I just reminded him who actually runs this company. She looked up at Ethan. And I meant what I said, about not being alone anymore. I know. I'm terrible at this, at letting people in. You're getting better at it. They left the building together, Victoria's hand in his, and drove not to her apartment but to Ethan's. Because Daisy had been asking to see Victoria, and because the apartment with finger paintings on the fridge felt more like home than the penthouse ever had. Daisy was waiting when they arrived, Grammy Susan having prepared her for the visit. She ran to Victoria carefully, remembering she was hurt, and hugged her with the fierce gentleness only children can manage. Sarah Rabbit missed you, Daisy said, pressing the stuffed animal back into Victoria's hands. But Daddy said you're better now, so she can come home. Thank you for letting me borrow her, Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. She helped a lot. Are you going to stay for dinner? Daisy asked. Grammy made spaghetti. Victoria looked at Ethan, the question in her eyes. Yeah, Ethan said. She's staying for dinner. They ate together, Grammy Susan, Daisy, Victoria, and Ethan, around the small kitchen table that had only ever held father and daughter before. Daisy chattered about school and her friend Emma and the book they were reading in class. Grammy Susan told embarrassing stories about Ethan as a child. Victoria laughed more than Ethan had ever seen her laugh, genuine and unguarded. After dinner, while Grammy Susan did dishes and Daisy watched a movie, Victoria and Ethan stood on the small balcony overlooking the parking lot. This is so different from my world, Victoria said. Spaghetti and cartoons and plastic furniture. Is that bad? No, it's perfect. It's real in a way my life hasn't been in years. She leaned against the railing carefully. I want this, Ethan. Not just the legal marriage or the strategic partnership. I want this. Family dinners and 6-year-olds who lend me their stuffed rabbits and someone who makes me eat lunch. You can have it. If you want it, it's yours. It means changing everything. My schedule, my priorities, my perfectly controlled life. I know, and I'm not saying it'll be easy. We'll have to figure out logistics and schedules and how to blend our lives. But Victoria, he turned her to face him. I think we're already doing it. We've been doing it all week without realizing it. What if I mess it up? What if I hurt Daisy by getting close to her and then failing at this? Then we'll deal with it, together, because that's what we do now. We deal with things together. Victoria was quiet for a moment, looking out at the ordinary parking lot of an ordinary apartment complex. Then she said, I love you. The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and perfect. I know it's too fast, Victoria continued. I know we're supposed to take things slow and be reasonable. But I'm in a hospital corridor scared and alone, and you held my hand. You married me when I needed protection. You sat through my surgery. You fought my corporate battles and made me soup and showed up every single time I needed someone. How am I not supposed to love you? Ethan felt tears on his face and didn't care. I love you too, and you're right. It's too fast and unreasonable and probably insane, but I don't care. I love you anyway. They kissed there on the balcony while traffic hummed below and Daisy's cartoon played inside. Two people who'd met in a hospital corridor and built something real from desperation and choice and the courage to show up. When they pulled apart, Victoria was crying too, happy tears that she didn't try to hide. So what now? She asked. Now we figure it out. You finish recovering. The merger closes. We introduce you properly to Daisy's school. We have awkward conversations about whose apartment we're sleeping in on which nights. We fumble through being actually married instead of strategically married. That sounds messy. Probably will be. But we'll do it together. always together. 3 months later, the Meridian merger closed successfully, adding significant value to Hale Industries' portfolio. Victoria's radiation treatment ended with excellent results. Richard Bancroft quietly resigned from the board to pursue other opportunities. And in a small apartment on the east side, a mechanic and a CEO and a 6-year-old girl sat together on a worn couch, watching Daisy's latest rainbow drawing dry on the coffee table. "It's us," Daisy explained unnecessarily, pointing to the 3 stick figures. "Our family. It's beautiful," Victoria said, and meant it. "You should hang it at your office," Daisy suggested, "so everyone knows you have a family now." Victoria looked at Ethan, who shrugged with a smile that said, "Why not?" "Okay," Victoria said. "I'll hang it right behind my desk so everyone can see." The drawing went up the next day, a child's artwork among abstract paintings worth thousands. Caroline asked about it, and Victoria explained simply that it was her family. Word spread through the office. The CEO had a husband, a stepdaughter, a life outside the company. Some people were surprised. Others claimed they'd seen it coming. Margaret Chen just smiled and said, "About time." 6 months after that, Victoria sold her penthouse and moved into a house halfway between the financial district and Ethan's shop. It had 4 bedrooms, a yard for Daisy to play in, and enough space for all of them to find both togetherness and solitude when they needed it. The first night in the new house, after Daisy was asleep in her new room decorated with rainbows and stars, Victoria and Ethan sat on the back porch with glasses of wine. "A year ago," Victoria said, "I was alone in a hospital corridor facing the worst news of my life. If someone had told me that a year later I'd be living in the suburbs with a husband and a stepdaughter, I would have thought they were insane. Would you have wanted it if you'd known?" Victoria thought about it. "I don't know. The old me would have been terrified. The old me built walls so high nobody could reach her. And the new you? The new me is learning that walls are just another kind of loneliness." She took his hand, the gold bands on both their fingers catching the porch light. "The new me is learning that the strongest thing you can do is let someone see you at your weakest." "You're getting philosophical in your old age." "I'm 37. That's hardly old." "Ancient," Ethan teased, and she swatted his arm. They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies emerge in the growing darkness. Inside they could hear Daisy talking in her sleep, the words incomprehensible, but the tone content. "She called me Mom yesterday," Victoria said quietly, "in the grocery store. She wanted the cookies with the pink frosting, and she said, 'Please, Mom,' like it was the most natural thing in the world." "How did that feel?" "Terrifying. Like I might break something precious if I don't do this exactly right." "You won't break her. You're doing great." "You have to say that. You're my husband." "I'm your husband who tells you when you're being stubborn or working too hard or need to eat lunch. I also tell you when you're doing great. And Victoria, you're doing great." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that until the wine was gone and the fireflies had multiplied into a constellation of living light. "Ethan," Victoria said eventually. "Yeah?" "Thank you for saying yes in that hospital corridor, for showing up, for teaching me that love isn't weakness. Thank you for asking, for trusting me with your fear, for letting me stay. Always stay," Victoria said, and it wasn't a question but a statement, a choice they were both making, every day, to keep choosing each other. "Always," Ethan promised. Inside the house, their house, Daisy dreamed of rainbows and cookies, and a family that had started with a desperate whisper in a hospital corridor and become something more real than any of them had imagined possible. And in that backyard on that ordinary Thursday evening, 2 people who'd met as strangers and married for strategy sat together in the darkness, holding hands exactly the way they'd held them that first day. Except now the grip was different, not desperate or performative, but steady and sure and chosen. Sometimes strength isn't found in power or survival. Sometimes it's found in the hand you choose to hold and the courage not to let go. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is ask a stranger for help and trust them enough to stay when they offer it. The rest is just showing up every single day, together.